All right, dudes, we are live with another Pangburn Hangout. Today is Saturday, so we're speaking with Dandan. Today's topic will be natural rights. I'm excited for this one. Um, I'm going to unmute myself. How's it going, Dandan?
What is going on, Travis? How have you been? Let me get my camera going, turn on.
Good, man.
Uh,
I am just going to invite these other guys to join us up here.
No problem.
Um, we got ARC, EVH. How have you been?
I have been great. In general, everything's been fantastic. I didn't do the last show because I've been working on creating and researching for this other topic I want to do, but the well has gone too deep for me to just do it in like a week or 2 weeks.
Right.
So I thought that we'll come on and actually keep like the show going a little bit and have a different topic that I
Nice.
think can rile some people up and is generally very interesting.
What do you what is the always the biggest point of contention when talking about natural rights? Because people automatically, I can already hear the voices saying, "Demonstrate that such rights exist objectively."
Well, I think that is actually the most both Hobbes, Rousseau, and Locke all agree that the conception of the state of nature is a hypothetical one for us to like to build off of.
Right.
Um, And there's I cannot demonstrate to you that they exist objectively because they're not objective, right? We constructed them. There are ideas.
Right.
Um, so that's a big contention. I think another contention too is that people tend to want to ground them in these hyper objective ways
Right.
that distract from the point. Especially with people who are either new to philosophy or people who like come out of religion, they carry that baggage of things have to be like absolute and true and if they're not like based off of like this fundamental absolute, then they're irrelevant because they're just all subjective, and you hear this all the time. I think that is the biggest contention that at least I see.
Right. Interesting. Well, I'm gonna work on getting a few more people in the room.
Yeah, let's get a few more people in the room and then we'll start. I mean, they're still talking about God down in the chat. I invited
Oh, okay.
them, but
Cool. Cool.
yeah, hopefully we'll live stream this. So far no one's watching, but
Yeah, we're
maybe get some really cool clips on it and then upload them later to YouTube.
nice. Yeah, we haven't been live in a while. We're on the Pangburn Offensive channel right
Yeah, yeah,
now.
because you don't know what's going to be said.
Exactly. Um,
How have you been in general?
Good, man. I was away for a week there,
I know.
refueling the engine, just
Mm-hmm.
hanging out with family. It was a lot of fun.
Incredible.
I got pretty close to a bear when we were out walking
That's
and
spooky.
hiking. It was yeah, no, it was nice. It's being back out in the wild. I love it. When were you first introduced to natural rights? What were some of your knee jerk reactions to it?
I think the first time I was introduced to natural rights was in high school when you learn about American civics and American government in social studies class. I think that was the first time I stumbled upon the concept of natural rights. And I honestly didn't really think much of it. I just like, oh, okay, you're like a 14-year-old kid.
Right.
But I think the moment I started taking it more seriously was around 2014, when people started running for president, we knew that Obama wasn't going to be back in the White House, and I kind of started becoming politically active at the time.
Mm.
And I started researching more philosophy of politics and political philosophy. And through whatever I had available to me, I started hearing about Hobbes's natural state, John Locke, these natural rights. They exist in nature, and I took them very seriously right away. Um, and it took me a while and a lot more reading to really kind of step out of that very dogmatic way of thinking about them.
Right. Now, can't someone just come along and have their own subjective moral standard that says this idea of natural rights is just dumb?
Yeah, you can have that.
Right.
I would caution them, but like it's not about moral or not moral. Um,
Mm.
right. So
how does this idea uh, reach out into everyday life? Do you think does it stretch into veganism? Does it stretch into the natural right to live? Maybe for a human being who's done the worst of crimes.
I think it stretches into our expectations of one another in society and our expectations from like our neighbors and our friends and those who live among us. I think that's where you see it the most.
Right.
Like if I hold the natural right of liberty for me is like I'm very Lockean in that respective, and I hold that as a unalienable natural right. Anything that either stops on my liberty, it becomes tyranny. And in many ways, other people and expectations of other people have towards me because they don't have that conception. That plays a very big role in the way that we relate to one another socially. And I think that's the place we see it the most when we actually create for example, one of the ways we can look at, I think it comes up a lot in discussion around um one legislating, which I don't agree with, but socially how we ought to speak to people who suffer from gender dysphoria or people who are autistic, right? Well, I don't care that trumps on my liberty. I'm allowed to live myself. Right. And this is also in contradiction when you look at like the wokeism movement that at the same time says that people should be allowed to live unapologetically them, but only within the specific confines. Right. So this is where I think these tensions and conceptions are very problematic and they're very much talked about incoherently.
Interesting. Well, we got some people in the room now. Melting snow is new.
Hello, melting snow. Hello, everyone.
Hi.
So, um, I really want to. I actually have a other topic planned, but it's been taking me a while to fully research, and the more I research on it, the deeper and deeper the hole gets. And the topic that I will eventually want to talk about is voting and democracy and representation from ancient societies to today, and how that should inform the way we move forward with legislating um, voting laws. Specifically, we look at what's happening currently with HR 1 and in Texas and Georgia. That's really the topic that I had planned, but that keeps getting pushed back. I think I'll have it done by next week. But so today, instead of that, we're going to talk about something that I'm more familiar with and maybe kind of develop a discussion. And that is the concept of natural rights and how they um, are informed by our conception of the state of nature. So, for those who don't know, the state of nature is usually found in political philosophy and political theory. And it is either the real or hypothetical of how human beings um, existed and behaved and organized themselves without political association. Does anyone have any ideas or knows anything about they want to share? Doolittle, symmetry, anyone?
Oh, no, I'm just listening. I'm not amazingly well versed on this matter.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll listen to what you have first, and then I'll make comments later. But at the exact moment, I'm trying to navigate some
Okay. So
kind
we
of.
can start with one of the first conceptions of the state of nature, at least the most popular one, and that is of Thomas Hobbes.
Yeah.
Thomas Hobbes was, I believe, an English philosopher. I don't remember exactly, but he he lived at a time where was a war in Europe, Protestant Reformation, and he really thought that the state of nature was a state of war. And he explained it this way. He explained that in the state of nature, all men are equal by body and mind. And even though some might be stronger or smarter, the weakest can still kill the strongest, either by fashioning some sort of tools, by confederating with others, or by lying. In a sense, his equality is that we are all equally vulnerable and subjected to death. And he goes that because of this equality, naturally precedes distrust. And it is from this distrust that we want to control things like food, housing, etc. And it's from this relation that war. And for him, the state of nature is a state of war. Without this, and the only way to get out of the state of war is through a type of social contract. But why is natural rights interesting in this regard? Because there's a few things that Hobbes believes we have naturally, and he calls this the first and second natural laws. At the time, they were called laws; they weren't called rights yet. One of them is what we know as liberty, and this is negative freedom. I can exercise my will in the state of nature as I want, however that might be. And the second natural law goes is for my own self-preservation. I don't, everything I do is for my own self-preservation. What he believes is that our natural right and the social contract should work this way. In order for my self-preservation, I know that I need to give up some of my liberties. I cannot truly be in full liberty and do whatever I want as part of my will without having self-preservation, as this will bring me back into the state of nature. The only way to exit the state of nature is, in a sense, to give up some of our natural rights. Or, yeah, that's how Hobbes saw that. Anyone have anything to say? Any questions, remarks?
No, it's similar to excerpts from things that I've read before as well.
Mm-hmm. So let me ask a question. Hearing that, does anybody in the what do we think society would have looked like under the state of nature? Like if you were a person, do you think you would try to like find groups to get along? How do you think that you would deal with that as a person, since we are talking about people?
Ooh. Good thinking.
I think being what we are, the state of nature for humans is to actually group up into tribes
Mm-hmm.
and live that way. I mean, it's pretty evident archaeologically that that's what humans did, even before we were humans. So,
Do you think that Hobbes is missing the ball on this like individual human that's just scared and
not entirely, because I think that there's a starting position from when we're considering our own actions in the absence of other people, right? How would you act in the simplest construct that you can think of, and that is that I own myself and I can pretty much do what I want with myself at any time, right? And then to figure out how we ought to act in conjunction with others, I think you have to start with a foundation of how I act when I'm only considering my own self-interest, and then it's not too hard to figure out that we are better off not alone, and therefore some of our freedom has to be constrained in order to facilitate group interaction. So I don't think he's wrong. I think it's just what he's starting from in order to understand the way the groups interact, you have to understand how the individuals interact with themselves without the group first.
So Hobbes does agree that Hobbes claims that this is a hypothetical. He doesn't claim that it's true. He claims this is his starting point in order to conceptualize how to build a government that would work for people.
All right.
But does anyone have any maybe like things that we think that either Doodle didn't understand or that Hobbes is not getting? Any type of conscious, like, do people actually exist this way? Is this hypothetical even analogous to what the state of nature might have looked like?
Nobody else has. Is the state of nature analogous in some way to natural selection? In a way.
Okay, so what are you picking up? What do you mean by that?
Well, I was just assuming that the whole idea of the state of nature as described, the philosophical state of nature that you're describing. Did that take any? Was that before Darwin's theory or not? Is any of the?
Yes,
I don't know.
this is
Yeah,
before.
way before Darwin.
Way before.
Okay, yeah. So they were. It was kind of like some kind of cultural natural selection, I guess. I don't know. I don't know a good way to phrase that. I'm sorry.
Well, you're actually picking up on something that a lot of people have said and written, and
Yeah.
out of much more modern conceptions of Hobbes' account is that he's actually giving us an evolutionary account of why species started working in groups, and not necessarily that this is how humans might have been, because a big criticism is that, well, humans never existed without a society. To be human is to be a part of a society, is already to exist with a working group. So,
yeah.
But there are some people that act alone quite often, and there are situations where acting alone and without a group is preferential.
Sure.
So it's not. I don't think it's given that human beings are always in a group and always have to be part of a group to still be human. Essentially, I think we are individuals. It's just most of the time we do act in groups because it is preferable most of the time to most people.
So we can look at, for example, psychological thing. When humans don't grow up within a society or within a group or within a community, right? What do those people look like? But how do they function? They're usually language deficient, right? Their brain doesn't develop fully. You saw this from the Romanian orphanages trial. You even see it from case studies of kids who got lost in the woods and lived with animals for 4 or 5 years. There's a very famous one in France, I believe, where the kid didn't know how to talk and literally was just like a feral creature.
Yeah, I've read things like that before.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I'm trying to add something intellectual here and it's working.
That's all right. That's all right. That's all right. So, okay.
I mean, go ahead.
No, you can go ahead.
I was gonna try to tie it more to how they saw the state of nature, but I don't 100% understand. I should probably look that up while we're talking here.
No, don't look it up. That's the whole point. Just have the discussion.
Oh, you don't. You just want to have the discussion. Okay.
Yeah.
Can you describe?
I'm not lecturing.
Oh, you're good. I like looking stuff up, but no, it's okay. Can you describe to me the way that Hobbes described the state of nature again? How he described it?
He described the state of nature as intrinsically a state of war, a state where humans can trust one another, a state that, because we're all equal, humans are intrinsically equal in the state of nature. Mm-hmm. No one man is necessarily smart or strong enough to really kill. The weakest man can kill the strongest, whether it's at night or with using tools or even with confederating with others. We are all equally vulnerable to death. And that's his big thing about the state of nature.
Yeah, but I mean that basically is kind of associated with the idea of natural selection in the theory of evolution. to that even the strong can perish at the weak, but it usually, I don't know, is that system attempting to proliferate the strong, the state of nature, since it's a war?
Um,
Is that
maybe,
the goal?
maybe.
Maybe.
I don't know if it's the
Uh,
goal, but I know Hobbes's goal is to try to find a solution to the Protestant
yeah.
Reformation, the war that he's seeing, and the
Okay.
death,
Got you.
right?
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
So,
hmm, I would have had to have lived in his time to really see it from his point of view, right?
mm-hmm.
Because they didn't know anything about certain scientific theories.
Yes.
Well, if it is a philosophy of political science in pushing that the strong should be what rise to the top, I would disagree with that, but that's just my personal opinion.
So I don't think that. So he goes further. He goes, in order for us to get out of this state of war, we have to actually give up some of our liberties. And he says that we have to give this liberty up to what he calls sovereign, which is a ruler, whether it be a monarch, a king, someone that we vote in. It doesn't matter, but we have to give up some of those rights to the sovereign. And that way we don't just have liberty for whatever we feel like. We can't just do all we want. We can't just kill. We can't just take, like, we actually have property.
Right.
Um,
There's no way to not affect something else, right?
yeah, but Hobbes, and I think this is where we're going to get into Locke. This is where Hobbes and Locke very much disagree. Locke, in the state of nature, believes that we already have property, where Hobbes doesn't. Hobbes thinks that property and the recognition of property comes from the fact that we do start to confederate and give up some of our liberties. He goes, in the state of nature, man walks around the forest, and wherever he wants, he picks up, and it's his. Right? And if someone else walks by and takes something that's mine, well, it's theirs now.
Yeah.
Locke agrees with Hobbes, but he believed that we naturally have this concept of property, not just liberty, and also life, which is much more like the American tradition. And Hobbes'
Yeah.
idea that property becomes a part of you metaphysically, as you work and toil the land. That's why we have property, because we work something, we toil it. Like, why, right? If I take a piece of wood and I start carving into it, now it's mine, right? It's not just a piece of wood left, stuff like that. And he goes, to deny that would be tyranny. Any ideas about that? Anybody thinks, yes, it's right, it's wrong? Can we actually have property?
Somebody else.
I think it's right.
What do you think are what people don't understand when they counter that? Like, what are some of the counter arguments you've heard?
The property's a thing.
Natural. The property is a natural thing.
The natural thing.
That it's inherent to humans, I guess.
Yeah, it exists within the state of nature.
I mean, it's not. Property's not exclusive to humans. All sorts of animals fight over property as well. So I think there's something.
A lot of mammals do fight over property. You're right.
Yeah.
So
Not just mammals, but snakes and lizards and.
Yeah, I guess so.
When you bring in the animals and you bring in property, so I'm on the same page as you, gentlemen. Do you mean when the animals fight over property, like if a lion fights over breeding rights to the lionesses, those lionesses are property, and the territory is property? Is that what you mean when you say animals? So
they fight over actual land and not themselves. Like monkeys fight over territory. So if you consider that property, I guess.
Okay, got it. Now I'm on the same page.
Yeah,
okay.
and rats fight over objects that they like pack rats and things like that. They'll fight over objects that they've found.
Gorillas fight very heavily over territory. So
birds fight over their nests, right?
Yep.
So if you think about your nest as just sort of your extended phenotype.
Yes.
once you build the nest, I mean, it's easier to me to think of it in terms of nests, like the way the birds act. Your nest is part of the environment which you control, which you created, and it's necessary for you to protect yourself from the elements, from other animals, from other competition to the resources that you've gathered, and not having the ability to maintain that nest means you don't have the right to life, because without a nest, without shelter, without a place to raise your children that's safe from predators, then there's no it's essentially depriving someone of a nest is essentially depriving them of the right to life.
How
So
so?
denying someone
bird, you
property
mean?
denies them life.
Sorry, there we go. You guys were talking over each other there. I didn't understand either one.
I'm sorry.
What did you ask?
Exactly what Symmetry said.
I didn't get it. What did you say?
And I forgot it now. Say it, Dandan.
Oh, he said, does denying someone the right to
Their property. There we go.
property is denying someone the right to life?
Yeah, there you go. That's the question.
Yeah, it's essentially denying them the right to life, because it does deny them the right to reproduce and to sustain themselves in a competitive environment that nature is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so, like, if you think about a farmer, okay, a farmer in the wilderness, in the northern latitudes, needs a certain amount of acreage that person can control to plant their crops, so that they can feed their family through the winter, and they have to have some place that they can store their seeds, or they can't plant the crops next season. And if you deprive them of any of that property, then you deprive them of the means of survival.
So, Don, how would that fit into Hobbes' interpretation of the state of nature?
Hobbes will say that property isn't actually a necessary component of the state of nature. I think Hobbes would argue, and he would say that, well, in the state of nature, property isn't even a recognized thing, right? Humans wouldn't go, well, that's his and that's mine. In Hobbes' conception of the state of nature, humans are like tigers, and it's simply yours if I can't take it. That doesn't mean that it's actually a moral wrong to just take that property. It just means that I took it. In a state of nature, property doesn't exist in the way that Locke sees it, because Locke makes much more of a transcendental argument that property is an extension of oneself. That by putting your energy into an object, this is a very hyperbolic thing, but by working and toiling, you basically make it a part of you through the sweat of your brow. That's kind of where the idea comes from.
Yeah, metaphorically, that's fine.
Yeah, but
yeah, sure.
Hobbes would disagree with that metaphor, and with that.
Oh, he would disagree. Okay.
Yeah, Hobbes would not agree that that's how you get property.
Okay.
I think that property only exists when you give it up. When I give up my liberty, my negative freedom, my
so
freedom.
Do you by default own everything?
Yeah, he says by default you own everything in a very much Christian, Judeo-Christian background, where Adam was created and the world was his, and he named the animals. Right? It's just yours. It's all around for you.
Sounds like a cultural natural selection, but a little bit less. I don't know how to describe that.
What do you mean?
Well, it's seeking, his state of nature is seeking to say that if you can take it from someone, take it, or is it saying anything about oughts?
It's not saying anything about oughts. It's trying to lay the foundation for a hypothetical,
right?
In which we can.
I got to remember this is before a lot of stuff too, so that's the thing I'm trying to get in my head. Witness what this is, the 1700s.
Hobbes, I believe, was before the 1700s.
Oh, okay. So this is like pre-Enlightenment. Okay, gotcha.
No, I think it was during the environment,
Okay. So after the Renaissance, then I got you.
Yeah, 1 second. Let me look up exactly the date.
It's all good. That's why I was gonna go look it up real quick too, because I didn't want to speak out of my ass.
That's all right.
Hobbes died 1679.
Yeah, he wrote it in
Oh.
1651.
Mm.
That's when he died. His Leviathan is 1651.
Yes.
Shit. Leviathan or the matter of something.
Yeah, so Hobbes and Locke disagree here about property, and Hobbes doesn't see property as an intrinsic part of the state of nature, which Locke does.
Most
Okay.
people would agree with Locke, though, on that, because his idea of property tended to be the dominant one, whereas Hobbes's, you might associate that way of thinking with certain indigenous people who might have thought like that, but they lost out historically. So it seems within the West, where Enlightenment was taking place, you had these two guys with their different views. But I could be wrong, but I think Locke's view on property tended to be the more, I wouldn't say accepted view, it just ended up being the one that most people gravitated to. I think. But whether it's good or bad, I don't know, but most people tended to gravitate to his way of thinking.
So Hobbes was a monarchist, and his Leviathan was often used to justify the monarch owning all property that they ruled over. So Locke only won out because monarchy was basically thrown over.
I see that now.
Yeah.
This is why when I brought up the idea of the sovereign, it's not necessarily, it could be it's a king and a ruler. You have to give up your natural liberty to the sovereign in order to exit the state of nature. You can't do that without giving away your right to everything. And that's where property comes from. Property can only be recognized by the sovereign, according to Hobbes.
I think it might just be an artifact of history that he was one of the first people to write about this at the time. And someone's got to start with an understanding of the state of nature so other people can flesh it out and make more comprehensive views of it, right?
Yes. So I think this is a good way to segue us into Rousseau. Let me just go through my notes. Yeah. So Rousseau was responding to a statement, to a question. I believe it was the University of Geneva at the time. Dijon, University of Dijon. And the question was, what is the origin of inequality amongst men? And is it authorized by natural law? That was the question that Rousseau into this like essay contest at the time. And this was, with all the history with Hobbes and Locke. So this is an idea. Where does inequality starts around men? Since Hobbes believes that in the state of nature, mankind is equal. I believe Locke also believes it. Let me double check.
Sorry, equal in what sense? Physically? Mentally? What does he mean by equal?
Equal in the sense
just born equal.
No, equal in the sense that no one man really, like, for example, the weakest man can still kill the strongest man, whether by lying or by using a knife, or like confederating with others. That we're really, even the differences we have are not enough to make us truly unequal in a state of nature.
I would disagree from a physical point of view, because unfortunately, certain human beings are born with disabilities. So a human could be born without sight, could be born deaf. So in that sense, he wouldn't be equal to someone who can see and who can hear. And that person would have the unfair advantage over the blind and deaf guy. So they wouldn't be equal in that sense. There would be a major disparity, which would actually lead to the blind and deaf guy getting killed or exploited if you didn't have a society that had beneficial laws or rules. So in the state of nature, I do think there are inequalities which take place.
But the question is generally, right? So let's not get harped up on the like outliers. Generally, and without like deformities or without like extenuating, men in general are equal to each other in the state of nature in a way that's not like I cannot just go and dominate all people that I see just in the state of it's just not going to work. The
So
idea
you
is that
mean like,
we're all equally subject to death is also another point that Hobbes makes. I think Locke also I don't think Locke is that one, but yeah.
that almost reminds me of Jefferson, what death and taxes. Yeah, well, I would agree with that. We're all equal to dying. We can't get past that. So yeah, in that sense, I would agree. Equal. Yeah, in that sense, in the state of nature, we all die. We can't get past that.
I mean,
Right.
you also. I mean, I don't want to get all Nivik on you.
Oh, you're a
Feudal,
robot. You gotta restart that.
much, but these people were born was talking about were
Whoopsie.
Oh, he's gonna come right back.
Cool. Sorry,
Yeah,
I've been sitting here reading reading Leviathan here.
Oh, that's language is a bit old, so it's not always the funnest.
Yeah.
okay. I'm back.
Okay.
So at the time that this was all being written, there was vast inequalities amongst men based on how and where you were born, or into what family you were born. And kings had the preceding philosophy to what these guys wrote was that kings had the sovereign right to rule because it was given to them by God, right?
That was one that's divine right, right? But there's yeah.
Right.
There's one way to look at it.
So this is like a counter argument to that, to the state that Europe was in 16 something was the king owns everything, and the lords that he appointed own, manage the properties, and everybody else's property, essentially property, chattel property of the lords that are managing the land that they live on. So
not entirely, right? So it's Hobbes describes it as a contract where you give up some of your liberty, but not all of it, in order to escape the state of nature. Because if the state of nature intrinsically is that of diffidence, distrust, which leads to war, inevitably, in order to leave that, I have to give away some of my natural law, it's a negative freedom. And you have to invoke what he would call, what was it? The specific word, the law of nature is to seek peace and follow it, right? Because everyone wants to, like, for self-preservation, and the right of nature is being able to, like, full liberty, and we're permitted to do whatever we want to do, to using war to protect our life or whatever it might be. But we have to give up some of that right of nature in order to escape the natural law, and the only way to do that, in Hobbes' account, is to give it to a sovereign, which is why he was, like, as EVH said, pro-monarchy. He was trying to justify the monarchy in many ways.
But what he talks about is true, but it's just that the monarchy has now been replaced by a republic instead. So people do give up some of their liberty in that environment, but it's not a sovereign anymore. It's now the democratically elected.
yeah,
government.
and
the whole body is a sovereign, right? The whole body can be considered the sovereign.
Yeah, and the important distinction between the way that it was viewed in the Middle Ages and the way that it's viewed now, with through the lens of natural rights, or at least the people that subscribe to that, is that the sovereign had the right because of some, it was given to them by God, right? They're the direct descendant of Charlemagne or something like that. And because they're direct descendant of Charlemagne, they get to make all the rules.
Yes.
Right. And so in our modern society view is, in order to keep from just devolving into warring bands of people who band together for protection and warring with each other, we have to give up our some of our liberty to a sovereign, and whether that's a monarchy or a democracy or a republic or uh, you know
Yes.
something else. So it still justifies a state. It's still they're still trying to attempt to justify the existence of a state, but not. But why? Why are we justifying the existence of the state? I think it makes a lot more sense to say that we willingly give up some of our rights to the state in order to prevent or in order to facilitate more group interaction and a larger society. I think it makes sense to say that we're doing that willingly rather than the guy who happens to be the king just is the king because he is, and you don't get to say anything about it.
So I think that's what I want to. I know Zemo is in the chat, and him and I had actually a long conversation about the conception of natural rights and the difference between Hobbes and Rousseau. Remember that, Zemo?
Oh yeah, I remember it. I remember the conversation, the details. I don't remember any of them, so don't quiz me.
Okay. Is there anything?
No, I'm just playing. I remember a little bit of it, but I'm just fucking around. But yeah. It was a good combo.
So when I just I'm not gonna quiz you on it, as you said, not to quiz you on it. But so I think this is a good way to segue into Rousseau, because like I said, Rousseau is trying to answer the question. The question being, 1 second, where is it again? I always forget it. What is the origin of inequality amongst men, and is it authorized by natural law? So, in his discourse on the origins of inequality, he actually writes that he conceives of two types of inequalities in the human species. And I think Dr. Bombay spoke about this. One he calls natural or physical, because it is established by nature, consisting of age, health, bodily strength, qualities of the mind, any type like that. And the other one is what he would call moral or political inequality, because it depends on the kind of convention that is established, or at least authorized by the consent of men. Any thoughts regarding that? What that might look like? What would it'd be the inequality when it's created by convention or establishment?
It sounds like
That's just a rudiment. I mean, a rudimentary way of saying that there are hierarchies that we voluntarily participate in.
No, the question would be, when you mention convention, you'd say like something that's normally done, and then you'd have to say why is it normally done, and so then you'd have to start making leaps and say, well, things are normally done because of inequality that exists by their birth or by their particular immutable characteristics or by some power struggle. But the convention would lead me to think that whether it's done intentionally or unintentionally, that is the way that it's been done. Period. You could decide whether or not it's. I don't know that he's trying to get to the cause of that necessarily. He's just mentioning.
So no, he's going to try to get down to it.
But he tries to. But and the point is, like, can you change it, and should you? I guess is the question.
Okay.
I don't know how you can, without then violating the autonomy or the same exact sort of issue you have on the other side. So you'd have to use the very same thing that you don't like to level the scale.
What do you mean by that? What is the thing that he doesn't like?
Well, I would say, like, if your attention, I'm not talking about Rousseau specifically. I'm talking about, I guess, the people that would use something like Rousseau to justify their positions.
Like what positions are you thinking of right now?
Well, like attempting to move the scales because convention is poorly framed because of some power struggle that exists that is unrighteous or unmerited. They would then have to do an unrighteous and unmerited act to level the scale.
Okay.
In other words, justifying the end, the means by the end.
Okay.
Or the end justifies the means, I say.
So I think that one of the things that Rousseau and this is what he's famous for doing, is that he says, and he's responding to Hobbes and Grotius, and he says that they are depicting, they say they're depicting savage men, but really they're depicting civilized men. Rousseau actually flips the script here, and he says that much of these things that they see, distrust, anguish, fear about what the state of nature looks like for man, he goes, no, that's actually the result of the conventions. When Rousseau looks historically at tribes and communities, he sees that they're actually very communal, that the state of nature does not look this way in the state of nature does not look in the way in which Hobbes or Locke described it. He does agree that men, are equal in this, like, we can each be we can die, or we can kill each other. But he goes that no, what happened is the first man to convince anyone that this is mine was the first one to begin the inequality. Let me find exactly. He also thinks that when you look at the state of nature of mankind, like, one of the things that Hobbes didn't take into account is that, well, mankind is naturally inclined to compassion. Mankind is naturally inclined to have empathy and sentiments. Mankind is naturally wants to have faculty of self-perfection, which is the idea of, like, let's say I'm whittling a stick. I want to get really good at whittling a stick because I do. And he kind of takes us through this development of what exactly happened. And let me see if I can find my notes on it, because I didn't prepare so well for the chat, so I'm sorry about that. Yes? What?
You're fine.
Okay. Oh, this is what he says. He says here, the first person who, having enclosed a plot of land, took it in his head to say, this is mine, and found people simple enough to believe him, was the first true founder of civil society. And he kind of goes through, like, the advancements of human society.
See, this implies a lot.
Yeah.
Because because the fact that he's saying they found people simple enough to believe him, so has a bunch of presuppositions.
Like, which ones?
Well, simple, number one. Found people, like, he found people simple enough to believe him.
I don't think he's
so
being
all of
so,
that requires a lot of, like,
I don't think he's being so literal. Hobbes and Rousseau both understand that they are talking about hypotheticals.
Even in the hypothetical there, that's kind of that assumes a lot about interactions between individuals when you're talking about the fruits of someone's labor and whether or not they are justified in saying it's their own.
Okay, I hear that.
That's all my and I've had that sort of critique with those sorts of folks generally. But that's fine. I am being nitpicky, I guess.
Okay. So let me. I want to find the exact part. That'd be easy to talk about it. One second. Okay, so he kind of takes us through the development of what the state of nature would look like as it develops, and he talks about how man would start having control over animals. It would set traps. All of a sudden, people will have different jobs within, like, their small little groups and communities. And slowly through this development, one advances led to more advances. All of a sudden, we have language spoken. And because the more the mind was enlightened, the more the industry was perfected, we stopped, falling asleep under the tree or into the caves, and we started having hatchets and sharp stones, which served to cut wood, dig up the soil, and we made huts, branches. And all of a sudden, all of these tools that before were a luxury to have became something that we needed to have to keep society going. Now that we have a history of hammers and housing and property and farming, all of a sudden to take away the hammer and to take away the hatchet would be equivalent to taking away what he would consider like a thing necessary to live, a thing that is akin to being in a state of nature. He kind of makes this account that the state of nature for humans changes as times moves on, where it can be considered just as tyrannical to keep take away a person's ability to like have an address, for example, in our modern day society. Right? That's still a form of tyranny from a group, a governmental institution.
Yeah, it's just relativism, right? So it's like what relative to what the norm is today or what someone may be accustomed to, right? Because it's essentially like the worst thing that's ever happened to you is the worst thing that's ever happened to you, regardless of the worst thing that happened to somebody else, relatively speaking. Right.
But he still, but he still doesn't think this is the point of inequality. And this is a quote that he says, each one began to, and this is now society starts developing. In proportion as ideas and sentiments succeeded one another, as the mind and heart are trained, the human race continues to be tamed, relationships spread and bonds tighten. People grew accustomed to gather in front of their huts, around the large tree, song and dance. Children and love, leisure became amusement rather than just compassion of idle men who women who have flocked together. Each one began to look at another and want to be looked at himself, and public esteem had value. The one who sang or danced the best, the handsomest, the strongest, the most adroit, the most eloquent became the most highly regarded. And for him, this is the first step of inequality. And at the same time, it's the first one towards vice. He goes, it's from these preferences that was born vanity and contempt and shame and envy on the other. He thinks that this distrust between people and our hatred for one another didn't come out of the fact that we were necessarily right away resource hungry, right? That's between states. That's between tribes. Within ourselves, our inequality starts at this point. He goes, it's precisely the stage. This is the stage we understand most savage people, is what he wrote. And it is, now we can kind of start making the distinction about the state of nature. But this is really what it means to be in the state of nature. The state of nature is one in which humans are living together. It is one that a human does not exist without his society. And yeah, he goes that it's actually the beginning of our civilization that made us really, really unequal. Where now we have people who are controlling property, who have distrust for another, that our communities have distrust for other communities. But within the state of nature, that's not what we looked like. What do we think about Rousseau's conception of the state of nature? It's a little more complicated, but it took me longer.
Does he have proof for that? That there was a time before civilization where we all treated each other equally in a collective, and then
well, yeah, I don't think there would be proof of that, right? So where can you get that?
Yeah, that's. I mean, it sounds lovely. I mean, I like it, but where's the evidence? How did he?
Yeah, I think you can assume some things. I think you can assume a few things about how people may have acted as a collective in order to even eat and survive with large predators, right? So I think you can probably assume that, because human beings are pretty frail without numbers or smarts. Now, there are some situations where people are individually amazing, but the only way that you could probably, like, especially if you look at like cave drawings, there's lots of people fighting a mammoth into a pit over a cliff, and that's how they ate them. So yeah, there's a collective that probably existed, but whether that was peaceful, fair, and balanced, I think is the jump there.
Well, I don't think he said it was peaceful. I think he's saying that no true inequality, like a serious type of inequality, was.
But see, what does that mean, really? Because like even being born without an arm or something would be,
It doesn't mean that you have more rights than I do. It doesn't mean that.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. right? It might be a physical one, but it doesn't mean that you have more rights than me. You can do things that I can't do. Like you are allowed to own this land, and I'm not allowed to own this land.
Well, see, that's that's where it
State of
changes
nature
things,
was
right?
just
Because now you have
But you
now
can
you
look
have labor.
you can look at like even like Native American societies or indigenous societies. That's kind of how they operated, right? They all kind of shared stuff. They shared clothing,
Not
right?
really. It depended on
Yeah,
what tribe you're in, right?
Yeah.
And then, but then even then,
but
like they would
but
still
these
be
did
leaders.
exist, right?
Yeah, but
These
there's
did
still
exist.
leaders of that. Like you have a giant teepee.
Yeah, but
I
there
mean, let's
isn't.
just be
But there
really
isn't.
like
But there isn't the same type of
specific.
So he kind of goes. This goes. He
state
goes.
of nature is like his state of nature is the separation of those two different types of inequalities, right?
Yeah.
Rousseau's. Say those again. Say them what you said the first time.
Was it? It was one
Um,
tribal and one individual, or something along those
No,
lines.
No. Yeah.
1 second. I have it here.
Yeah.
Two inequalities. One which I call natural or physical because it is established by nature and consists of different age, health, bodily strength, or qualities of the mind. And the other he would call moral or political inequality. It depends on the type of convention that is established, or at least authorized by the consent of men.
Yeah, so Rousseau was the first woke philosopher, apparently.
So he was saying those conventions
He was-
instantiated inequality, right?
Yeah, and he says that he goes that Hobbes spoke about a savage man. It was civil men they depicted. We're then talking about a one who doesn't trust, one that is afraid, one which is trying to hoard his materials. Because that is a man who's already been through society. That is a man who's already been through this convention where there is such political and moral inequality.
Yeah, I'd like to jump in here.
Conventions are the beginning of
Go ahead,
inequality.
Zemo.
Who was just talking? I want to see what they were saying.
Is me. Go ahead, buddy.
Okay. What's up, guys? Yeah. So, I mean, I had this talk with you before, Dandan. I think it's interesting. I think Rousseau is classified as a romanticist, and I think the title suits him very well. Bombay pointed it out, and it's something that I would ask too, where is this line that he drew that said this was civilized and this is uncivilized, or this was good civilized and this is our civilized today, which is brutish men, like Hobbes said, but they're civilized actually. I would wonder where he'd draw that line at, because just from a game theoretical type of perspective, like these things are going to occur in larger civilizations. And I just don't think it's as rosy as he thought it was. Now, one of the best points that Rousseau makes is you said Rousseau thinks society has made us more and more distrustful and violent. He thinks that whoever established this land rights created the first society. And then you went on to mention like traps for animals, specialization of labor. So
The first step of society is to say this is mine and it's not yours. That was the first step.
And the good point, the interesting point that Rousseau makes is the luxuries become, the luxuries of a certain time, like spear or axe, become the norm, and then the norm then becomes necessary. So depriving somebody of the norm could be considered doing violence onto them, vis-a-vis taking away someone's internet. Nowadays, if you don't have internet, you're kind of fucked, or so on and so forth. Before they had guns, you had a hatchet, but now that we have guns, if you take away somebody's gun and somebody comes and tries to shoot them, they're fucked. You know what I mean? So, but yeah, I mean, all of it. But the thing with like the best singer and the best dancer, like to me, that's just inevitable. And like I don't really think that that's a too bad of an inequality. People can handle inequality as long as it seems fair. So, like John von Neumann was a brilliant
that's when contempt started. He's saying that's when contempt started. He's not saying that was
right.
I mean, that's what he's saying. You don't have to see it.
Yeah, that's when contempt started. I just don't see a way around that. There's always going to be somebody better than me. Like John von Neumann, like he came along mathematics. He redeveloped numbers before I was born. I don't think that I should have any say or be jealous of, Fred Astaire, or the girl he danced with and say, be contemptful or jealous of them. I mean, I might be jealous of some people's skills, but like tough shit, you know. They're better at it than me. I bet I need to get better. You know what I mean? I just don't see a way around that. I mean, I know I can see that there is jealousy and everything, but that's all I got to say for now.
Quality is irrelevant, right?
Like equality. Like I said, people can tolerate inequality as long as they don't think it's unfair inequality. Like a doofus,
Like I was saying, that political convention of saying, like Dandan referenced, the first person saying that something else was mine and not yours, that's the political convention that led to contempt. If that's the political convention that led to contempt, you could trace that all the way back to two people.
Right.
Someone having a disagreement.
Yeah, you could. I mean, you could take that type of thinking like back all the way to, the caveman days. I don't know. So, I mean, not saying it's untrue. I mean, obviously there's some reason for it.
Yeah.
But yes, I agree with you.
Yeah. So I don't know what the state of nature is anymore.
Yeah.
I have a pretty good understanding of what, after reading Leviathan a little bit, I think I get what Hobbes means, and I kind of think I understand what Rousseau means now. But the state of nature just fluctuates. The state of nature that they're talking about fluctuates with time and with political systems.
Yes. So Rousseau was, French, and when was he alive?
Rousseau was, I believe, the 1700s.
1700s. He died in 1778.
Okay, so I'll just say things were not going so hot in France, so I can definitely understand like where he's coming from and all that.
Yeah, for sure.
Is he one of the main formers of humanism, or is that something else?
I don't think so.
I don't either. Okay, I just thought I'd ask.
So in this, and I think Rousseau finishes us off with saying this: if we follow the progress of inequality in these various revolutions, we will find that the first stage of the beginning of inequality was the establishment of law and the right of property. The second stage was what he called the institution of the magistracy. Well, that is like, the chiefs, the leaders, etc., etc. And he goes, in the third and final stage was the transformation of legitimate power into arbitrary power. And what he's saying is that he kind of, let me open up exactly his words. 1 second. I have it over here. Okay, he goes, in these various forms, all magistrates were at first elective, and when wealth did not prevail, preferences was given to merit, which was a natural ascendancy, and to age, which gives experience in conducting business, and cool-headedness in deliberation. For example, the Edlers of the Hebrews, the generals of Sparta, and the Senate of Rome, and even the etymology of our word tenure show us how much age was respected in former tribes. The more elections fell upon men of advanced age, the more frequent elections became, and the more difficult were made to be felt. Intrigues were introduced, factions were formed, parties became embittered, civil wars flared up, and finally, the blood of citizens was sacrificed to the alleged happiness of the state. And people were on the verge of falling back into the anarchy of earlier times. The ambition of the leaders profited from these circumstances to perpetuate their offices with their families. The people already accustomed to dependence, tranquility, and the conveniences of life, and already incapable of breaking their chains, consented to their servitude, increased in order to secure their tranquility. Thus, it was the leaders, having become hereditary, guard themselves as a proprietor to the state, of which they were first but the officers, to call their fellow citizens their slaves, and count them like cattle in a number of things that belong to them, and to call themselves the gods and kings of kings. He takes us through this account that when the way we found our inequality today simply through this process, where people, establish someone in you look at, for example, I know EVH has a really good grasp of history, and he could probably explain it better than I can. after Rome fell and Roman Empire started weakening, how did the generals and the owners became kings at the time? Exactly. How did
Um,
that break down?
so you can take like the historical event where the Franks rolled in and took over the rump, often called a rump state. It was the last Roman state in France called Soissons. Um, and basically, the Franks rolled in and became the military protectors of the magistrates and eventually the Roma Gallo-Roman people were just kind of advisors to these military powers, and the military powers were traditionally hereditary in the Germanic Gavelkind succession. So basically, the feudal class in Europe, from France, Spain, and Italy, were all German settlers who used hereditary succession and just kind of took over where the Romans left off. If that answers the question you're going for.
Yeah, exactly. So it was, and what ended up happening is legitimate power was turned into arbitrary power, and the class of the rich and poor was authorized. That the strong and the weak was secondly authorized, and the third was that of master and slave. And he sees that this is where inequality exists in the state, and this is how where inequality began. And it didn't actually begin in the state of nature. It didn't actually begin that the way it's precisely because of the way in which we conventionally created our societies. What do we think? How what I know people in here. Oh, Doodle End. Bruce left. Okay. Damn, I know that they would have disagreed with me. Um, Anybody have any ideas about this before we move on to turn this into what it therefore means to have like natural rights, and how should we organize our government, and what should we look for and respect our government into doing?
So,
Segue into that.
if you don't mind, I'd like to address Zemo's question earlier of how did Rousseau come to define the state of nature.
Okay, go ahead.
Both Rousseau and Hobbes, you have to look at what they're writing in the context of their lived experiences. Hobbes has a very pessimistic view because he lived through the English Civil War, which was incredibly brutal. And
Yeah.
meanwhile, Rousseau grew up in what is now today Switzerland, in a very idyllic and agrarian society that had very little direct government oversight. But at the same time, he was in a French feudal aristocratic system where there was unequal laws. Like, for instance, if an aristocrat killed a peasant, they would first have a different court system, but they also wouldn't necessarily need to serve time if they could just pay the peasant's family. So both of those views are heavily influenced by their lived experiences, and it's one of the reasons why they clash so much, because they lived very different lives. So that's the pessimism from Hobbes, because he saw people die around him, and that's the optimism from Rousseau because he had like a very good childhood. Remember, it's Rousseau lived before the French Revolution, so it didn't quite get too bad in France. It was actually he would have been alive under Louis the Sun King, which is like very, very height of feudal France.
I mean, yeah, Rousseau would, yeah. All right. So let's get a little more contentious. Let's see how does this play into the way people think about politics in today's times, and what our governments should be doing. So what do we think that, let's say hypothetically, Rousseau had to talk about what government should protect and what government should do. What do we think that he would have said versus how Hobbes would have looked at it?
That's a good question.
Anybody have any guesses, any ideas? Just shoot it out there. There's no right or wrong answer, really. How about Scott? How about Big Lebowski? What do you think? Oh, sorry. Bombay?
No, I'm absolutely fine. I want to hear more.
Hear more, hear more?
I haven't got any.
I'll say something if nobody else will talk.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like Rousseau might fall a lot more under the democratic socialist, maybe Bernie Sanders type, and it seems like Hobbes would be more of a libertarian, fucking do your own thing kind of a guy. That's my first guesses. Probably simplistic, but I don't know too much about him. So.
But let's also remember Hobbes was arguing for relinquishing your rights to the monarch, right? To the sovereign.
Well, that's not good. Right.
Okay.
Yeah, that seems troublesome to me. I mean, obviously there's a natural amount you got to give up in a democracy. If you're talking actual monarchy, that kind of changes the whole topic. But yeah, I don't know. So what was Hobbes's? What did Hobbes have to say about like democracy, things like democracy and stuff like this?
I actually don't know. Let me look up. I don't think he said much about democracy. I think he really was just talking about. That's what this whole thing Leviathan is, that the sovereign would be created by many different branches, and all these things together make up the sovereign.
Right. Yeah.
I think he
Yeah.
said,
The picture on the book. I'm sure there was one more, but the picture that I've seen is like a king. And it's made up of like a bunch of pictures of other people, like images of other people.
Yes.
Yeah.
He's saying, but it's a form of agreement, a transferring of right. But Rousseau says the same thing.
Yes.
You have to transfer some of your rights. They actually both very much agree on this fundamental point of a type of social contract. And we would think that they wouldn't agree on it, because they both have such different conceptions of where inequality starts and what the state of nature is even like. But they very much agree on that in order to break out of this inequality, you need to give off some of your rights to a sovereign. Rousseau calls it the general will, and that would be what we today would conceive as a constitution. Right? The general will would be like the constitution. Everything else would kind of be built around it. I think Rousseau also had in his mind much more of a parliamentary system, where the representatives themselves elect a leader rather than a executive branch like the way we have it in the States.
Right. Fuck. What was the first thing you just said? right before the last thing you just said.
Which one?
It was
that Hobbes and Rousseau actually don't very much disagree on how to exit the state of inequality. They both agree in a type of social contract and agreement. Right?
Yeah. Oh, you said the general will, like a constitution or something. Now it seems like to me, at least in America, it seems that our Constitution, wasn't thought about or written by just like any old people. It seemed like a very small party kind of got together. All be, popular people that people liked and thought were smart, and they obviously were. But the point is that a relatively small group of people made the Constitution, opposed to general will. I don't have a point or anything. It's just an observation. But it's better than other forms. I think America got lucky with who we had arguing for what, you know.
So what would be someone to say? I'll just bring up a prescription. I'll bring up that Rousseau's idea that certain developments in society become necessary in order to even be free, and that this conception that he made, that as society develops and its tools develop, in order to even be able to exercise our freedoms and to be unequal, we need to have some things just, you cannot take it away anymore. So some of the artifacts and the tools that we develop eventually become necessary, and it becomes worse to lose them than to have even gotten them in the first place. Where it becomes more detrimental to the person to lose their hammer, to lose their saw, than the luxury of at the beginning to get a hammer or get a saw. And maybe this will divide the room a bit on how government today should deal with things like internet access or healthcare. That without these things, we cannot fully fulfill our freedom and be free and be equal. And I would agree with that. Does anyone disagree? Do they think that's a bad idea? That shouldn't be?
Well, no, I'm pretty agreeable to that.
I was just going to say that this is why I kind of thought Rousseau would be more in the Bernie Sanders camp. Like, you know, we need to provide basic baselines, you know, to take care of people, health care, internet access, college. Now, you know, something like internet or health care, it's going to be with Rousseau and social. It seems that certain things we can much more agree on. We can agree on much more. And other things are much more contentious, like healthcare compared to internet access. So that's why I said he'd be on that
public
side.
or like or roadways, public roadways, right? That's another thing the government offers to us. Post service, military, right? Police departments, fire departments, ambulance services.
Yeah, so that's a great point, because there's tons of shit that we do every day that we agree should be socialized or, you know, run by the state, and it's run pretty darn well.
But it's not about being run by the state. It's about, it's necessary for us to even taking that away would be more detrimental than never having it in the first place.
Right.
I think you'd have to argue about each of those things individually. There certainly are things that taken away would be detrimental. But it would be hard to say more detrimental than never having it in the first place. That's like, what is that supposed, like when you talk about like infrastructure, I mean, if we took away all the infrastructure, then, you know, everybody would die.
Well, right, when you look at if a human has never existed outside of their, a human never existed, it's always existed within tribes in the state of nature, right? When we are currently, this is like our tribe, our society, roads, to lose it now would be, the society would not be able to function. Our community would not be able to function in the way that it's been built upon to function.
Yeah, certainly not in the numbers that we have now, and with the urban centers and suburbs and such a small portion of our population growing their own food. If we didn't have a lot of these things, almost everybody would die of starvation, like within a month.
But never having it in the first place, that wouldn't be the case, because we've never organized in this way.
There wouldn't be 7 billion people on the world if we never had it in the first place. There would still be the 200 million that we had back when Rousseau was writing.
Oh, there's more than that back then, but okay. But yeah, I understand. I mean, you know, this semantically, when you say, you know, taking it away now would be worse than ever having it in the first place. At first can be kind of semantically tricky and like, what does he mean? But like when you say that, or when I'm thinking that, I picture like just like this Native American tribe, right? They're just chilling. They're just by themselves in Arizona. Unlike Native tribes normally are, you know, normally they're destroyed by white supremacist policies. No, I'm just playing. But anyways, they're chilling and they watch you build the freeway, and they're like, there's a freeway. They don't use it. Then there's a war, destroys all the roads, but they're fine. They're like, take it or leave it. They don't need it. So it's But once it's introduced to a society that needs it and it's taken away, I mean, that's when it becomes detrimental. But if you never had it in the first place, it doesn't matter.
So how about healthcare? Let's hear some opinions about healthcare. What do you think, Doodle? Should that be something that should be supplied? Is that something that we're starting to see that, people who don't have it, is a serious form of inequality in our society?
I've actually never met anyone that doesn't have healthcare, so I'm having a hard time accepting the notion that people don't have healthcare or don't have access to it.
I mean, I can't afford it. So
you can't. Well, neither can I.
Oh, so you know someone already? What are you talking about?
I mean, I have the health. I get the health care that I need, but I can't afford it.
Okay. Yeah, I think the affordability is more the problem than the access. Yeah.
So
I agree on that.
So and it's a different question to ask whether someone is being deprived of health care or whether they just choose to spend their resources on other things. Those are two totally different scenarios. And just because some people choose to spend their resources on things other than healthcare doesn't mean that the government needs to provide it. I don't think that's a.
What would you say to a society where roads weren't public and you would tell someone, hey, listen, you're just spending your resources not on paying, building your own road, not paying the expensive toll tax to go and trade goods at the market.
Like New York City. Yeah, you want to use the George Washington Bridge at $16, right? The government does not provide that road for you.
We can even talk about no post office. Well, what problem does this arise us with?
Sorry, where does that $16 go that you pay on that George Washington Bridge? Who ends up with that money? Is it a private company or is it still the state?
The New York Port Authority, which is a private company that's granted monopoly on running the roads and bridges in New York, I think.
Well, they're also subsidized by regulations, right? They're not just entirely privatized.
It's a complicated. Supposedly that money goes to maintaining the bridge, and I think ideally that's the situation.
There's at Koch Bridge, right? There's all these other bridges.
There's all these other bridges you can take, and they don't all cost money.
We can go as far as say the bridges should be free, right? Or you can say it's a fee so we don't get tons of traffic. Whatever it is you wanna look at it. Instead of let's look at the
why should they be free? Why should it be free to use something that someone else built?
Well, it's not someone else built; it's we built.
Yeah, I mean, we pay taxes on it. So, down here in Georgia, so that's where it comes from, and so everybody can use them. But down from Georgia, if I went to a road and they asked me to pay, I'd look at them like they had two heads. I reckon up north there's more people, and
you already did pay for the roads.
More traffic and shit. Yeah.
Yeah, you already paid for it.
It doesn't work.
You pay for it through taxes.
Right. They don't do that up there though, or is it private? It's privately owned, is what you're saying.
I don't know. I don't know about some of the bridges in New York. They're publicly owned, but the city outsources management of it to it.
Yes.
There's one for sale right now.
The Brooklyn Bridge is always for sale.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry, Dan.
That's all right. So
I don't know. So what do I think about healthcare? I think that's a personal service between one person and another, and essentially, if you say that we ought to provide healthcare, then what you're doing is you're forcing people to provide a personal service to another person.
And this
Like,
breaks what natural right that they have?
That who had, like, a doctor?
For example, like you're saying that by giving people access to healthcare, what natural right of the doctor or which people's natural rights are we violating? What's
I don't know. It's just a
what
free. It's just a free market principle. So, I mean,
Would it be?
there's a voluntary. If there's a voluntary interaction in terms of negotiating a price, then the free market can, can adjust its prices based on how scarce the various goods and services are.
what would you say about
And when you get
police
something
officers?
like free market police officers, we have a lot of those.
No, saying
I'm okay with that.
The problem is the free market doesn't exist as like this autonomous entity. It's actually managed by the state. So you actually have a mixed economy.
Yeah,
So
to the extent that it's free, yeah.
So I mean, if it was 100% free, what you're saying would make sense, but it's not like that in America. I don't think it's definitely not like that in the UK. It's mixed. The government has its hand in manipulating the economy and stuff. So it's not like the free market is allowed to be the way, I don't know, a libertarian would want it to be, like autonomous. I don't know anywhere in the world where that exists. What I'm getting at.
Yeah.
So
I mean, you can have
we have private police forces, right? Are we violating a free market principle, a natural right principle? Are we somehow harming people by having the job of public police officer, who that recognizes, your safety
No, I don't think so.
and law, right? Okay. So why would a healthcare one be one which violates that principle?
I don't know. I don't think most people. The job of a police officer is more public than private. There's not a lot of interactions where, let's just say, I need a police officer, and like there's something specific that I need from the specific individual police officer. His job is more generally patrolling and enforcing public laws.
Well, I don't.
Right, and it's not. He's not providing a service. He's not providing a personal service to me. He's providing a public service to everyone at the same time by going around enforcing the laws. And a doctor, when I go to see a doctor, they're providing a personal service to me. And the amount of how much I decide to go see a doctor, it's up to me and the doctor. So it's not really the best. The locus of decision making is not really the best if the quantity and quality of the personal service between me and a doctor is managed by someone high up in the government or by an unelected bureaucrat. So I'm not saying that it's necessarily a violation of someone's rights, but there's a level of information that I have about my health and that my doctor has about my health. And so whether
the reason why I'm really not trying to like put my opinion here. So a lot of my explanations have been vague, and I'm trying to like get more opinions going. But the reason why I bring this line of thinking forward, and I brought up the state of nature, is because when we think about rights, we think about them very much as natural rights. And I'm trying to view that like that's why I brought up Locke, this conception of these things exist like in as a natural right: property, life, liberty. And Hobbes and Rousseau don't see these things as natural rights. Hobbes sees the only like natural right is you can kind of do whatever you want to do. You have liberty over your own self, and you're permitted to live your life as you wish it. My point is sorry, I think I cut EVH off. He wants to say something as well.
I just wanted to ask Doolittle, do hospitals not provide a public service similar to police precincts?
They do, yeah, and they do get a lot of hospitals in terms of like what a hospital's business is. They provide, I don't know, I'd say ambulance services. Hospitals don't go around patrolling for sick people and pick them up and give them care. They sit there. They own some property where doctors can congregate, and nurses, and group together to provide more efficient scenarios with all the different tools that you need in one place. And so it's like a little concentrated marketplace for healthcare services. But police officers are like, it's hard to understand how it's hard to explain how I understand the categorization of something as being a personal service or a public service. So police officers are there to enforce crimes, right? Or enforce laws about crimes. And if you're a victim of a crime, then you can report your crime to a police officer, and they may or may not investigate the crime. They'll chase down criminals, and the criminals are not in the way that modern law is. Criminals are not causing damage to an individual necessarily, but the criminal behavior causes damage to society. And so the police are acting on behalf of society to find criminals which are causing damage to society. And that's why even if if somebody breaks a law like assault or something felony, there's a lot of times where that person will go ahead and get prosecuted, even though the individual that's the victim doesn't intend to press charges, right? So the reason why that can happen is because the criminal is victimizing society. That's the way that it's viewed, and that's why prosecutors can prosecute someone even if the victim doesn't ask for it. It's much different in civil court. But police officers don't generally go around enforcing civil law, with few exceptions, with something like enforcing court orders for eviction. There's very few exceptions. Most of the job that police officers do is kind of general and public. And so if you think about it, like a public park is just an open space where nobody really has to do anything except for maybe cut the grass. There's minimum maintenance, and most of the time people are not enjoying the public park, but it's there if you want it, and it doesn't take any personal interaction with another human being for you to enjoy the public park, right? But if you start talking about like an amusement park, right? We would all be worse off without amusement parks, but it doesn't mean we should get amusement parks for free. There's a high level of personal interaction with the owner of the amusement park, and very expensive rides that somebody has to build and provide to people. And someone's got to take tickets, and someone's got to make sure you're safe and going into the rides, and there's restaurants and stuff like that. So an amusement park is a lot like a public park, except for the difference is there's a high level of involvement for the people that provide that park to you. It's not, and it's
what if this is what I don't understand. What if a community was like, hey guys, we should have a public amusement park. Yeah, sure. Let's go city court. Yeah, let's move more city taxes and pay for a public amusement park and keep it running.
Yeah, so that's fine if the city all votes and says we want to have a public amusement park. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of people that are seriously upset that their taxes are going up by as much as they have to provide that public amusement park.
I mean, listen, if it's been voted, then it's been voted for. But the point is that does it violate some type of a natural law or natural right?
Like a person who was previously living there that doesn't want a high level of park services? If the people go and they vote that, oh yeah, no, we're just going to take your money and then we're going to make this park that you don't want. Yeah, that absolutely does violate the rights of the people that don't want an amusement park. Because it's not like it's a small portion.
What right does it violate?
Well, the city is going to have to forcibly separate a person's money from his wallet in order to build and maintain that amusement park and hire all the people that are working in it.
So you're against all taxes? I'm just making sure. Because like that is, taxes is government coercion to get your money. Period. That's what it is.
That's how you should say that.
Right, and so what kind of things would you be willing to put your gun to somebody's head to take the money out of their wallet to fund?
Healthcare.
Healthcare.
Yeah, so you would shoot someone in the head to take their money so that you could provide healthcare to another person?
I wouldn't shoot anybody in the head.
But I believe that, yeah, I wouldn't shoot anyone, but I believe that.
But you'd hire someone else to shoot me in the head.
No, I wouldn't
don't
do
wanna
that
give up
at
my
all.
money for your healthcare.
But what I mean is that through society, we're all interconnected. So if there are people who can't pay for healthcare, and we're living in your society where if you can't pay, well, then tough. What happens if there's an outbreak of a virus? It's no good all the rich people living behind walls, because society is going to be affected by those poor people who can't pay for medical healthcare or get it. So everybody's going to be affected, even the rich people who can afford it. So that's the way I see it.
And when we have exceptions, like people that have real emergencies, they can go to the emergency room and they don't get turned down. So the society that we live in now, actually, there's nobody that actually doesn't get healthcare if they have an actual emergency.
That's true, but
healthcare in general. There's a very wide range of the kinds and quality of service that you can get in our world, and some of them are, and some of them people say, well, we really need this, and well, like if you're having a heart attack, yeah, you really do need some healthcare. But the quality and amount of healthcare that you get is something that is a personal decision, and it's a decision between you and your doctor, right? So the government making that decision of the quality and amount of healthcare that a person should get, I don't think it's efficient for society. I'm not
What
saying,
do you
I'm
mean?
not,
What do you mean? What do you mean? So this is where I think it's important to recognize that we are moving the discussion from the original point, was that this is somehow violating the rights, and we asked what rights, and now we're talking, well, it's not pragmatic.
It's the right
and
to
it would
property. Well,
cost.
it's the right to property, right? So if I,
Well,
my, I have
person,
my right to my
one second, a
property.
person, just like with the police department,
I'll answer.
You can privately own a mercenary police force, right? The government has one to follow its laws, but you can hire one for one of the things. For example, let's say I go ahead and have a protest or an event. The police is going to come and protect me, right? I don't have to hire a private police force.
You have to pay extra for that. Actually, in most places.
No, if I go and have for this I'm allowed to peacefully organize on the streets. And
yeah, if you have,
I don't have to pay a goddamn thing for police to make sure that people don't attack me.
It's protected free speech, right?
Right.
Yeah, personally.
No, in most cases, if you organize a protest that's sufficiently potentially violent that a police force is required, then you're going to get charged for the extra police services. Absolutely.
So, I don't want to get tangential too much.
A private event is different than a protest, right? So if you schedule a private event like a concert, and I need police presence, that's different than if I just protest in the street.
Right. So I mean, if it's just you going to protest in the street,
me and a group of people, and like 30, 40 people show up, I don't have to pay anything.
Yeah. Now, I'd like to say that as far as your question of what right is being, I guess, attacked or whatever, I guess the best argument would.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Just making sure that we remember that these rights that we're talking about, we're trying to base them off of the conception of natural laws and what that means, and how that plays into how governments function. So just remember that. Keep going.
Okay. I don't know if this is falls under the parameters, but I was just going to say, if it's any of them, it's probably just like free bodily autonomy to be able to do what you want to do. Now, obviously, when you're a police officer and that's your job and there's a murder, like you don't have bodily autonomy to not go to the murder. I mean, you do, but you lose your job or whatever. Yeah. You do, but you lose your job. So, but I think there's just a fundamental difference between police officers and doctors. So, a police officer can be trained relatively quickly. whether they respond and the person gets locked up, or whoever they respond to, whatever dangerous county precinct they work in, or they work in the sticks and it's not dangerous, they're going to get paid. Period. Now, with doctors, it can take 8 to 10 years to become a doctor. There's no guarantee of the person, if they come to the door, can pay for this thing. Granted that they're way too expensive. But I think, and it's also how the systems are set up. Now, most police forces were set up by the government. These are run by the states and the government, right? So, but healthcare was not set up.
Not at first. We look at many of the historical
Not at-
how these police departments they started. They started little sheriff out clothes, like in the West or whatever it might be, or it was privateers and stuff like that.
Okay. Well, generally speaking, nowadays, that's kind of how it went. Now, of course, historical exceptions there will be, but healthcare, on the other hand, has never been, at least in the United States, had any amount of attempt at socialization really before Obamacare. Well, I'll take that back. Medicare, Medicaid, which are very popular, but yeah. So I just think the system that both of them interact with are fundamentally different, and also the occupations and who is going to pay said person for said occupation are fundamentally different. And I think that's now as far as where the natural rights and does this violate certain autonomies, I'm not sure if I even answered that question, and I apologize if I didn't. But
so where I draw the line is when it's a personalized service. Right, so a doctor has to provide a personalized service to patient. All doctor-patient interactions, with the exception of vaccines, actually.
Isn't a lawyer a personalized service?
Yeah, of course, right.
I mean,
the state will still offer you a lawyer. The state still has to pay for a lawyer.
Yeah, the state provides you with defense counsel.
Yes.
If they're accusing you of a crime, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's also the case of the state.
Attorney,
yeah, that's the case of a state. I mean, the state initiating an interaction with a person, not a person that wants a personalized service. Like if I want a lawyer to do my immigration paperwork, or I want him to do my taxes, or I want him to do be a prosecuting attorney in a civil case, like the state is not going to provide that to you for free. They only provide.
When the state,
provide lawyers,
so for example, the state will offer you documentation, information. You can talk with a teller on how you should do things, but they're not going to give you opinions on how you should do it, right? But the state will still offer you those services. And the reason why I bring that up is because I feel like that you're missing. At least I think you're missing a specific part of the puzzle here. Is that no one's saying that doctors have to work. No one's saying you have to work for the state. If there's like no doctors, the state can be like, well, now you're going to have to be a doctor and you have to give these people treatment. If you just want to be the asshole, like, no, I only work privately, then you only work privately. But the idea is that we should communally have a fund to pay for people's healthcare, because healthcare is such an important part of being able to live your life. We know that prevention is better than reaction, right? So the idea of, we already offer, emergency room. Well, emergency room isn't offering anything. Emergency room is the equivalent of saying, police forces only show up once a murder has happened, but they don't try to do anything to stop crime from happening in the first place. And they do all the time. And isn't that a public service to make sure people don't get sick to begin with? Like a sickness, we also know that it has extrapolations within the community.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot more.
Well, I don't know if this is.
A lot more.
I don't know.
I don't know if this was in healthcare when it is preventative. So with things like vaccines, we have free and low cost vaccines like all over the place. We have free and low cost methadone clinics.
I'm confused. Your system, I'm trying to understand it. Are you pushing for like 100% free market economy where people will pay for what they consider? Okay, but this is where I get confused, because now it becomes subjective when you think the government should get involved and not. It's almost like your own subjective.
So with the line that I'm trying to draw in all the government services, that get provided is whether if they're providing you a personalized service that's different for you than it is for another person. If it's a human to human interaction and it requires a lot of investment in whatever it is, and there's human to human interaction where you're requesting a specific personalized service, then it's probably something that shouldn't be paid for by the government, because they're not able to provide the same level of service to everybody. So one of the things is when there's personalized services, it has a potential to get very expensive, and healthcare certainly has that facet. And if you're using taxes to pay for the healthcare, you're providing a high level of service to some people and a low level of service to some other people. In exchange for essentially what's if it's going to be a flat tax, everyone's paying the same amount, and some people are getting a high benefit from it, and other people are getting a low benefit. And I don't think that's a moral way to approach governance. And just say it's like if you have like an HOA, you've got a condo, and they have a policy where you have to get termite treatment for your house. If someone finds termites, you have to get termite treatment for your house. Well, the one house that got the termite treatment is spending $12,000, and there's a small benefit to the neighbors in that they don't get termites, but they're paying for somebody else's termite treatment, right? So if you all vote for it, that we're going to pay for all the termite treatments, and the HOA says, okay, we're going to pay for all the termite treatments, and then you're going to have some really massive HOA bill just to pay for all the termite treatments. And if everyone agrees to it, that's fine. I'm okay with it if everyone agrees to it. But with the case of healthcare, there's a lot of people that don't agree with it. So what you're doing is you're taking a large amount of money. On average, it's 15% of our economy goes to pay for healthcare. So you're going to have to essentially tax 15% of my paycheck to pay for healthcare for everybody. Now it's going to pay for healthcare for me too, but what if I don't want that level of service that you're offering? Maybe if you provide a minimum level of service, just the common services that everybody needs, and it's not personalized, I would be way more okay with that. But the way
that's still personalized. Having a PCP, someone has your file, knows your history, has an intake.
No, but what I'm talking every year is like okay, so like my grandma wants to get a hip replacement, and she's got 8 different brands of hip replacements to choose from, and one of them is $5,000 and the other one's $20,000, and the government's paying for all her health care, so she's going to pick the $20,000 one, even though maybe the $5,000 one would have been appropriate.
I mean, isn't that a very much a very simplistic straw man, because health insurance companies already do this, or any type. Most people don't just pay straight out of the pocket.
But we're not talking about insurance.
No, we're talking about the system as it exists. We're talking about where I don't see what.
You're talking about adding government health insurance government health care for everybody as a government service, which I don't agree with doing that.
Yeah, but I'm saying that it's important as a positive right for people, so people can actually be free.
It's not a natural right though.
Okay, so
it can be a positive. It can be a positive right. I totally agree with that.
So this is where I think we're trying to get very interesting about the distinction between positive rights, negative rights, and natural rights. And is there a real distinction between natural rights and positive rights, and natural rights and negative rights? Right, and this is why we kind of went through the whole litany of talking about, quote unquote, the state of nature and the rights that exist for us in the state of nature, where Hobbes agrees that we have to let go of some of our natural rights to even have a peaceful civil society, and without that, society is impossible.
Right.
Locke says that the government, the only way to exit the state of nature is to uphold these. Inequality also exists from a social perspective. And Rousseau goes, well, some natural rights even change through time as it becomes necessary to exist to be equal. That since we're equal in the state of nature, moving outside of this equality is bad for people. Kind of agree with that. And the idea is that by not doing so, aren't we violating this natural right in a way that without having healthcare to begin with, people cannot live freely. Without having roads and post service, people can no longer live freely. They cannot
Yeah, I
exercise
mean,
freedom.
I
They
don't
cannot
think that. I
exercise
don't
their
think that's
pursuit of
true.
happiness.
I think most people can live most of their life without any health care at all, and still live freely.
I'd like to chime in here for a little bit. On Zemo's point that it takes 2 years to train a cop and 12 years to train a doctor, that's a very American experience. In Europe, it can be 8 to 12 years for full cop training. And then I actually agree with Doolittle on that some parts of healthcare that don't have to do with quality of life or life-threatening things like cosmetics and
Sure.
other things like that, that's fine being privatized. But as far as the government offering different types of healthcare based on different plans or socioeconomic condition, that's not true for national healthcare services. For instance, in the UK, prescriptions are heavily subsidized to the point where it's between like $1 and $5. And same thing with checkups. It can be like $10 for a checkup instead of having to do a $50 copay for a simple checkup. And arguably, the 15% you cited of the economy is because a large part of the healthcare system is privatized. So making it public and providing equal treatment for all people, regardless of socioeconomics, would reduce that cost potentially. There's conflicting data on that, but overall, if 23 of our similarly cultured neighbors, and like France, Germany, UK, and Canada can do it, the United States can probably do it and make that lift too. And then finally, on healthcare never being public, there's a history in the United States already of public hospitals, either nonprofit and contracting with the government, or municipally owned, and the budget is part of a local municipality, which is a state. But we have like poorhouses that go back to the 1700s, which were state supported projects, and military hospitals are also public entities that provide a public service to people. Like there's huge military hospitals in Texas that do this. So the market for public health in the United States has been primarily mixed, but to say that it's entirely private is missing the history and the reality that a lot of hospital administrators are not taught with MBAs, they're taught with masters in public administration. So that's just my 2 cents on the argument going back a little ways.
I like that. Any contentious opinions to it? Everett, real quick, UVH. How do you view the concept of the way we talked about the state of nature, and natural rights as they pertain to that, and to public health care?
Okay, so first, the natural rights, we've been talking about it as if it's one thing that we all agree on, and natural rights for Hobbes is very scary to him. His perspective on this is basically natural rights is whatever might makes right. So if I can impose my will upon you and make you my slave, that's a natural right. For Rousseau, it's different. It's not so lawless as we might consider it. Natural rights for him is what would be guaranteed, and basically if everyone lived in a tribal society, which is broad political and economic equality. And going back to Zemo pointing out that Democratic Socialists and Bernie Sanders folks would agree with this, you're right in pointing that out. A lot of Rousseau's works was an inspiration for the Jacobins and individuals like Maximilien Robespierre or Gracchus Babeuf in in the French Revolution, and his views on what Dandan was broadly talking about as far as new materials and new tools coming in and that changing the game. His views on that are essential to the Marxist theory of historic materialism, which we don't have to get into here, but Rousseau had a large impact on socialists, communists, and libertarian and anarchism, because libertarianism and anarchism are very much related. And libertarianism is not necessarily a right or left wing thing. There's many thinkers on either side that will ascribe to that. Noam Chomsky is a prominent example who self-describes him as a socialist libertarian. Whether or not you believe that's an oxymoron or not, you might be missing what he's saying in that, and it's kind of a moot point. But that's kind of how I view natural rights, especially since natural rights is like more theory than it is reality. So it's a tricky thing to talk about and to try to apply and base laws and policies off. Same with humans in the state of nature, because really, what are any of those? Like, we can't even agree on a substantive definition for either of those. It can be very slippery, and there's been like 300 years of people smarter than myself debating and trying to figure these questions out.
So I would say that that's exactly what I was trying to do. I was trying to show that we cannot conceive of natural rights and the state of nature as anything more than a hypothetical for us to make broad generalization on the public. And I think if you watch the live stream from the beginning, Pangburn asked me a few questions on what I think is the biggest problem with this conception of natural rights and the state of nature. And one of them is that we take it so dogmatically, that we take it if it's a thing that we should care about, and that it's real, and if we violate it, we're somehow violating a person. We cannot look at it that way. Many of these conceptions were used to answer questions, and one of them you can even look at in the 1970s. I believe John Rawls, in his Veil of Ignorance, invoked a similar hypothetical regarding natural rights, and that the only way to truly build a good moral and equitable system is by actually taking away society, which is the veil of ignorance. You don't know who you are, you don't know where you are in society, and that's how you make decisions.
Has anyone asked you? I'll try and do a Pangburn for what are your measurements for that? How do you prove natural rights?
I don't think they're real. I don't.
Okay, it's all subjective. All right, fair enough.
So, but I want to be careful about the term. It's all subjective. Many things are subjective. The way we feel is subjective. The way we relate to each other is subjective. But we can kind of figure out what's the best way to organize and think about it. It's not necessarily subjective. I don't know if you mean it that way, but a lot of people say, "Oh, it's all subjective," because they synonymously use it with arbitrary.
Yes, I didn't want to use that word, because when you and when Doolittle, and I think I was involved, I think Zemo or someone else was involved, when he was giving his opinion on healthcare, I was going to say, well, who's the objective arbiter to decide about the various things which were being brought up, like personal health and whether the state should get involved? Who's the objective arbiter? Because a lot of arguments were being brought forward, and one could argue they were all subjective. I mean, and I was biased because I believe in healthcare. So I'm thinking, well, maybe I'm just being subjective. I'm not being objective in the way I'm looking at this. So it's like, what measurement could be used to come to an objective answer to that question about the healthcare part? Is it possible, or is it just always going to remain subjective? Some people think the state that people should receive healthcare, all people should receive it as a right. And some people don't believe it's a right. Maybe it's just meant to be subjective and it can never be answered objectively. I don't know.
Well, here's a way that just to think about it. I think healthcare it's a really broad term, right? It's not a small niche thing. It covers a really large aspect of all of our lives, and it means there are many different kinds of healthcare goods and services that are being sold in the marketplace, and to just blanket say healthcare is a human right and therefore we should. I mean, that's it's way too broad, right? So if we were to say on anything specific, it's hard. It's a lot easier to make a decision, I think, objectively about whether it's good for society and good for the individuals and worth it to everybody. In the sense of it being, Pareto efficient, where nobody's worse off for making the decision. So if you're talking about vaccines, the even the current vaccine that we're talking about, which is the COVID-19 one, that's still in the experimental stage, and we're not sure exactly how well it works, but it seems to work pretty well, and it seems like most people want to get it. I don't think there's a lot of people that would disagree if they're serious thinkers that if the government offers this vaccine to anyone who wants it, then that's totally fair and it's good for everybody. The more people that get it, that want it, the better. And it doesn't start to get contentious until you start talking about people who don't want it having to get it, right? But no, there's not even a lot of Republicans that are anti-vaxxers that are willing to say, I think it's a bad thing for the government to pay for this. That would be a very small portion of the population. Almost everybody can agree that vaccines in general save lots of lives, except for a very small, like, religious minority that are anti-vaxxers, right? So if you go down to the level of a specific good or service, then we can quite easily get to where most people agree, and there will only be a few things that people don't agree on. So there's another service, that facelifts for old ladies. Do you think that the government should be providing facelifts to all old ladies? Almost everyone would say, "Oh, that's just purely cosmetic. Most people don't want facelifts.
I wouldn't call
It's
it
totally
healthcare.
unnecessary."
Unless it has to do with like the quality of life, like they were in a serious burn and their day lived life.
But most people would say that if someone's a burn victim, then reconstructing the person's skin so that they can live a normal life is totally acceptable.
Right.
Whatever plastic surgery for burn victims that they need to live a normal life, that's fine. Most people would agree with that, and that's healthcare. Well, it's a wide range of things. How about medicine? Okay, let's just say, how about these prescription drugs? Let's just say that there's a prescription drug that you might want to take, and it gives you better testosterone in older age. Right? Is that something that should be paid for on taxpayer dollars? Like these low T drugs?
You know what the most
Viagra?
interesting thing about that?
That's going to be a little bit contentious, right?
I think the most interesting thing about that would be that depends on the situation. This is why, and I think this is where you make the distinction between personal or private care, whatever distinction you said exactly how you said it before. But the doctor that you work with should know whether this is good for your health or not, whether it's something you need to do. Right? There's many people who later in life the drop in testosterone can affect them in many negative ways, whether it's bone density, increase risk of arthritis.
And women that postmenopausal need hormone therapy as well. But there's a high degree of personalized services, and to just say I think to the extent that it's not a personalized service, it's something that we all might need someday, and if it happens to me, I want it covered, and then that's, most people will agree to saying that it's fair to include in a public service, right? So firefighting to me is the because. Okay, go ahead.
I was just going to say with this healthcare. I mean, I think any argument for any government subsidized healthcare is going to say, well, we're dealing with the lowest common denominator. We're dealing with people who have to have shit right now. We're not gonna do these extra things that society deems subjective or arbitrary. And there are a lot of things in health that are totally objective. Is your heart beating or is it not? That's objective. But subjective, you can get into all types of stuff. Should we pay for Caitlyn Jenner surgery? Am I depressed? I don't know. Am I depressed? My doctor says I am, but I just think I broke up with my girlfriend, yada, yada, yada. So, yes, you can always find these subjective things. But my point is in the healthcare argument, people are just arguing for the baseline. Bernie Sanders isn't trying to give, people breast implants. He's trying to get people, to be able to get an x-ray and not have to have a $1,000 bill or something.
He's trying to get the
You know what I mean?
military
and
to pay for
that's
transgender reassignment surgery
oh,
for the soldiers.
I don't.
Yes, if that makes them
I-
more
I-
effective in their roles, I don't understand why treating a medical condition like gender dysphoria would be a bad thing, especially
So
when you've
all-
spent millions and
all I'm
millions of
saying is-
dollars
Whoa,
on
whoa,
training
No,
whatever
it's all-
role they
Fellas,
are.
fellas.
It's all very
Sorry,
contingent.
guys. Sorry, guys. I don't mean to be rude, but are we finally getting to the bottom of your opposition to healthcare? Is it because of the whole Democrat gender reassignment thing? Is that
Oh no.
okay? All right.
No, I'm just refuting the point that Bernie Sanders is trying to just get everyone to a baseline minimum level of healthcare.
Because this is we're getting to the end of our 2 hours, and we're gonna probably end up moving down to the tavern where we can have a much more open discussion.
Let's move on from the healthcare. Then I'll talk about it later.
No, it's fine. I want to stick on to. I really do want to stick to the healthcare actually, but I want to stick to it in from this perspective. We were a lot of the whole talk is about that concept of natural rights and rights and how we should view that from a like Rousseau's perspective, the one that influenced
From
Marxism
humanists.
and so all these different perspectives from that perspective, we got onto healthcare as a point of making sure that people can actually be free and exercise their liberty, et cetera, et cetera. And the original thing you said, you think that it violates some sort of right. And I have yet to figure out what type of right you think it violates.
It's a right to property. I said that was the first thing I said.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
So-
yeah, well, no, you're wrong, Dad. You're wrong, bro. Because you don't need socialism to have a socialist healthcare. Like in England, we've got nationalized healthcare system, but you have a right to private property.
Yes.
Right, so that's what I'm not seeing how this concept of property, it's your conception of how it exists in a natural state matters when we're talking about something like healthcare.
But it's
or even if I'm not disagreeing with you on this. I'm not disagreeing with you.
I'm saying his point is probably because a lot of Americans get polarized. So a lot of the people on the right, as soon as they hear any form of social healthcare, they think communism or socialism.
This is a straw man situation, though. There are actual issues with depending on which version of nationalized healthcare you're talking about, and that would be the first step in defining the terms, because it would depend on whether or not a person has the right to their own labor and whether or not the right can be exercised without imposing on the rights of another.
Yeah, but you can have free rights and still have an increased tax system and still have private property and choose who you want as a neighbour by where you live. That's what we got in England.
Mixed economy.
Well, that's what is that the healthcare that we're talking about? Like this, like nationalized healthcare? Is that because there are different versions of this, and so which one are people discussing?
No, what's happened is that the whole discussion of healthcare is very subjective. What people
right?
And this goes back to the discussion by Dandan about natural rights, and he gave us the two different views, one from Hobbes and one from Locke, and it was kind of subjective. So it's like trying to find the right one.
And then Rousseau.
Rousseau.
No. Every human has the right to healthcare, in my opinion.
Well, how is it possible that you have the right to healthcare without imposing on another individual?
I think compassion is the golden mean in a way. Compassion, like love for fellow humans on this planet, is what defines morality to me. You know what I mean? So
that's fine and all, but how do you
love every human planet?
I want to highlight that from beforehand when we talked about the state of nature, Rousseau conceptualized that within the state of nature humans are compassionate. and compassion is
that's-
its
Yeah,
default.
you can see that both ways, man. Like you can
No,
say,
I'm not
you know.
making an argument for. I'm just trying to bring it back to
Yeah.
like the framing of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So just,
Yeah, Rousseau
I know
was the
you were here
original
at first,
philosopher,
Bruce,
so.
but like EVH, for example, he said that he thinks natural rights are more like these I don't want to put words in your mouth. So something along the lines, am I right, of they're very much like decided upon, and they're not necessarily, you cannot look at them as like these true scientific things that are like absolute, right? That's
Can
how you
I
went
say
with
one thing real
EVH?
quick?
Okay.
One
Go on,
second,
One thing
Evan.
real quick. To a might makes right person. Fairness is unfairness. Fairness is inequality to a might makes right person. That's
Well, I mean, it would seem to me that like the idea of socialized healthcare is might makes right from its get go, because that means the might of the society is more important than the right of an individual.
I mean,
right?
that
So
holds
that
out.
is might makes right.
That holds out
but
for American jurisprudence.
let me talk about that.
But
Let me talk about that point.
That was
no. Let me talk. But it's like
people being free, like free to own slaves.
Let me talk. Just because you have a socialized healthcare system does not necessarily mean you have to infringe rights on people, except perhaps taking money away from them through tax.
Just taking their money
after
away
this,
from them,
let
that's not
EVH talk,
right
and
at all.
then someone else wanted to say something. 1 second, let
I'll say
EVH
something
talk.
real quick.
Okay, Zemo and then EVH.
Can I and can I after?
And then Nevik.
I was just gonna say let's go one at a time. I know everybody has a totally sweet point to make, and I respect that, but let's just try to go one at a time.
Yeah, I would apologize for talking over.
No, I'm being petuous as
well.
Bruce.
Yeah, Bruce. What the fuck, dude? God, I'm just playing.
It's always the conservative Christian that's the terrible person.
You're the pariah, dude. Just accept it and move on.
All right.
So to Bruce's point, that public health does not necessarily supersede the individual. Like there's long-standing judicial precedents in the United States that it actually does. The government has all the authority it needs to quarantine the island of Manhattan if it deems that is necessary, and the courts would support that. Historically, the courts have supported that. I personally like some of the people who are experienced with NHS to kind of describe how it works in reality, because I feel like in the American context, it's very hard to really understand what happens. I was trying to speak to it earlier, and I brought up the point that prescriptions are largely subsidized, but I don't have any firsthand experience or hard numbers on that. So I'd love to hear from people who actually live in a socialized system, and if they feel that their rights are infringed upon.
It's not a 100% socialized system. It's actually mixed. So that's the thing.
I live in Britain, and it's you don't need to worry about insulin. You don't need to worry about going to hospital if you break your arm. I mean, you don't like.
Well, the difference is somebody else is worrying about it.
No, it's not that fair. It's not that ideal. It's a great idea, but they do have problems like waiting lists. They complain about waiting lists because there are a lot of people who are trying to use that system. So sometimes some people might need an operation and they wait for a long time and they don't get the operation and they might die before the operation. So there are good things. There are good things about it, though.
Emergency operate. Yeah, it's not perfect. No system's perfect. And we got a rating of the world, but we're not lowering the ratings of the world. We still have a decent healthcare system that's subsidized by the public. Just that, like Cuba is almost on the same level as America as well, and that's fully subsidized. Cuba's got one of the best healthcare systems in the world. It's just that it's difficult because. Like Britain right now, we've got such a large bill for the healthcare system. It's hard to maintain, but I think the world's wealth, I think the world's wealth should be put for humanity. Obviously, capitalism, you go to work, your value of labor, value of products and commodities is important, but You know, we should be looking after humans in this world. We shouldn't be looking after making people richer. We should be making everyone make sure they get the food they need, the healthcare they need, and all that.
Why though?
Because I think our purpose in life is to help other people. Like nihilism is kind of true, but as a
Some
human,
people don't believe that.
as a human with compassion, I think that, as I was saying, it's my opinion rather than a fact. But
Okay.
I think that's what humanity should be for. I think that's what all our money should be for, helping each other. Instead of, if you got no money, you should die because if children got no money, they should die. I think that's wrong.
Yeah, and I agree that the conservative Christian should think the same way too, because Jesus believed in that. Hey, Bruce.
Believed in what?
Jesus believed in helping the poor, giving to the homeless.
Yeah, he also believed in private property too. You realize that, right?
Please, dude, I'd like to know how he believed in
Oh, would you like to know how? When he there are multiple ways, but the easiest way is when he looks at the coin that belongs to Caesar and with his name on it, tells people to give that coin to the person it owns, and that coin has the mark of the owner on it, and that is the exegesis of that. If you'd like to read the Greek,
I've never read
he acknowledges
that.
private property.
Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's.
If Lincoln's face is on the penny, does that mean we have to give it to Lincoln?
Have you ever heard of
talking specifically about the ownership of property?
Have you ever heard of the Poverty Templars? So the Templars who follows the Beatitudes saying, "Happy are those poor who are poor, for in heaven they'll be rich."
Nobody is saying that. Also, I mean, you can go all the way back to the law, where a commandment is telling people not to steal. So there's private property and property that's owned by individials that you're not allowed to take.
I've got no issue with private property.
Well, I'm trying to flesh out the ideas.
I respect that. Putting private property in Bible study, that's good. It's like I was raised on Bible. I was raised a Catholic, and I find that very interesting. But yeah, I've got no problems with private. I'm a lefty, yeah, but I've got no problems with that at all. Because I think.
Well, it's interesting because it's what's private and what does someone have agency over? Do they have agency over their own labor?
I think we are all indebted in some way to the fellow human, but we should be able to be entitled to get what we earn.
Sorry. All right. Sorry, Dan. I don't want to be real.
I think it's balance. Yeah,
I want to ask
guys, let the conversation go where it's going to go. It's fine.
I want to ask you a question, Bruce. So, like, the whole agency thing, right? So, with healthcare, there's a problem. You're essentially, making police enforce doctors to treat patients. At least you might agree with that characterization. Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
Okay. So okay, if I'm a fireman and there's a fire, and my boss says, "Hey, you have to go to that fire. You have to take your body and physically move it." And then there's the government saying, like, "Hey, you need to treat this person for whatever they have." Like, what's the contradiction there? Like, what's the biggest problem in your mind between those two? Because those seem like they would be similar. You know what I mean? But they're obviously not. Well, because people are way more likely to agree. Oh yeah, the fireman's fine, but it gets hairy with the doctor for some reason. And I'm trying to understand.
Well, I actually don't. I would apply the same to both. And like the most fire, we're just going to assume it's voluntary or not, because most fire departments in the U.S. are volunteer fire departments. So which one?
We're talking about
you've agreed upon, right? That premise from the gate. Now, I guess if you could say that every doctor has to
call it a policeman, then just call it a policeman, a state policeman. Call it that.
In that case, they've agreed to be under the law and the direction of their superiors, which in that case would be what?
Yeah.
The police state would be the commissioner, but or sheriff.
Right.
But I mean, sure, but that would only be that assumes agreement. But does it also allows security to exist, right? So private security exists. Now they don't have the same necessarily the same jurisdiction and powers, but that's somewhat problematic actually. But the same should apply to healthcare.
You ever seen RoboCop?
Do doctors not also make that agreement?
Hang on. In RoboCop,
No.
they try to privatize the police. Do you think the police should be privatized?
In some cases, yeah.
So both should be allowed to exist, state and private.
That's right. Yeah, correct.
Okay. So what's wrong with that with healthcare?
Not necessarily wrong with that, so long as we can get the issues. Right? So long as we can get the issues of supply and demand worked out in that scenario, right?
Yeah, but I mean, do you think it's right that some people have to go without insulin because they can't afford it?
Do I think it's right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's dice that are rolled. It's the same reason why people are born with diabetes type 1 in the first place. Is it right that I'm not born with diabetes type 1? There are a number of problems with money. There's for instance, there are people that live in big homes and small homes. Why is insulin itself somehow magically different than any other resource?
Exactly. But
how about food? There's quality food and there's bad food.
It's magically different.
Bad things happen.
It's magically different because people need that to survive. So
if you're asking me whether or not people need food to survive too, if you're asking me whether or not we should help others,
would you refuse a starving child of food?
Right. If you're asking me whether or not I personally would do those things, and the answer is, of course, yes. But if you're asking me whether or not these scales of society should be adjusted in such a way that these sorts of natural inequalities don't exist, I would say no.
Bruce, I was just curious. Sorry if I'm in regards to like COVID. I think in America, you can correct me if I'm wrong. They made it available for everybody. If the vaccine was available, yeah. If they decided it would only be available for those who were able to pay for it, would you be fine with that, according to your politics? Okay, I see. All right.
And if it were so important for the livelihood of everyone, right? And everyone had to have something to survive, there would be individuals that would purchase it regardless. And it's the same way as anything else, right? Like if you have to have food to survive, you're going to get it, whether it's donated or purchased with whatever little dollars you have. So the same thing will occur. We don't have people starving. We don't have people not getting a vaccination. Currently, if you need to get kids, currently, if poor children need to get vaccines, they get it.
But if you look up the malnutrition rates of children in America, it's quite shocking.
According to what? People are dying of starvation in America.
Yeah.
Like compared to what country?
No, I'm just saying it's compared to Britain anyway.
Well, so would it be fair to compare Britain to, let's say, New York? It's similar in size.
I'm just saying in the country. In the country that's got one of the most abundances, it's also got one of the strongest poverty rates.
And
what
what's
if
wrong with
COVID
that?
spread because people paid for it? What if it spread more?
Bruce, what do you mean? What's wrong with that? Like
by default, this occurs in nature. What's the problem?
Yeah, why is that? Why is there something wrong with that?
Right? Why is it like inherently bad?
No, I mean it's like it's I mean, just because it naturally occurs does not mean it's good.
It doesn't mean
that's some reason why it's bad, though, too.
Well, I mean, it's
their goal
bad
is not to create a more equitable society. Therefore, it doesn't matter. That makes sense.
Yeah,
I missed what you said. What did you say in the beginning, Chad?
Right. Your goal isn't necessarily to make a more equitable society, so it doesn't necessarily move the needle either way.
Yeah, I'm not interested in weighing the scales of outcomes to somehow provide equal mediocrity to everyone, as opposed to letting people get the best they possibly can or less than.
But what about ensuring a good meritocracy that people with reduced skills, with the skills, are given the chances, even in deprived areas, to utilize those skills.
Well, I don't understand where you're going with that.
Talk about equal opportunity. So, giving people in giving people.
Well, if you show me a
they
situation where people don't have the opportunity, then I would
They do it
agree
in
with
America. There's so many social programs in America anyway.
Okay.
Yeah, look, you say about your right to property and wealth, but even in America, there are programs to help people in deprived areas because wealth should be used to help people.
But that happens. That occurs all over the place.
Exactly, but what people like us think they should do more. But I know it's precarious balance.
Well, so the force of the market, or even let's say lobbying and corruption, is somehow worse than the force of the majority telling everyone what to do with their dollars.
It's not that. Let me say a point, and you can talk. I'll be 5 seconds. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Saying it's about wealth for humanity, and of course, there's corruption and bureaucratic problems everywhere you go. So if we did take control of the wealth, it'd be fucked up. But what I'm saying is that wealth should be used for the sake of humans than making individuals rich, and that's it. That's all I've got to say. Wealth on this planet should be used to help people rather than make.
I don't know where you get the axiom from. To me, that just seems like an arbitrary axiom.
Well, the question of today is: are these axioms grounded in what we would consider natural rights? Are natural rights grounded in what we would consider the state of nature? And the point of going through all these things is that instead of just appealing, we can say, hey, listen, natural rights and things, they're malleable, they move, they change depending on the society at the time. And, positive rights are just as important as negative rights. And you can take that point of view. You can take the point of view, no, natural rights or anything other than it's tyranny and harmful to the person, or how do you justify them? Let's get down to business and not just talk in platitudes about, no, I think we should love humans. Okay. Why do you think we should love humans? And Bruce, I think we should value the free market. And let people tell, why is that? Why is that why we value? Where are we getting this concept from?
Mm-hmm.
Sure. What we're saying is that I think I don't base my point on logic because in the real world, the real world is objective, and morality is subjective. But as a human, I think we should appeal to that humanity for helping other humans because, if in a life of meaning, we know what suffering is, and most humans don't want others to live through suffering. And we have so much potential to change the world, to make it a better place, to help the humans in need. I think most humans can agree with that. But it's not as easy as saying we should have a revolution and take down capitalism because then some other corrupt system comes up, like in every other country. But
yeah, we take it for policy.
But I think that wealth in the planet should be given to help humans. It's not based on any logic; it's just based on compassion. I think compassion is a golden mean in morality. Compassion is the perfect morality in a way.
Okay.
And compassion. What's that?
I like that. I mean, if you want to look at, like Dandan said, let's get down to the meat and potatoes of it. I'd say America has done a lot of great things. England's done a lot of great things. There's a lot of countries with, like our Constitution, we have negative rights. We have a lot of these ideas come from Locke and Rousseau and Hobbes and the idea of natural rights. And I think you can make empirical claims about what works in certain societies and what doesn't work. I could make empirical claims about what succeeded in the United States, what succeeded in England. And I just think we need to learn from each of these instances and incorporate them.
What I think we need to fight is exploitation.
Attitudinous and simple, but I think it's a good place to start. As far as the whole thing with let's just keep what's wrong with people being poor? I mean, come on, you don't have to. Hold on, let me finish. You don't have by saying, "Oh, these people are poor," that's not a bad thing. Does not earn the free market, laissez-faire capitalist side of your argument any extra points.
What I'm saying is that people are so poor they can't afford food and they're dying. That's what I think is wrong. So I think children dying of starvation is wrong.
I agree.
I don't think being poor is wrong. Yeah.
Wait, sorry. I think I
thing
could be wrong, but I think Zemo's comment was based more at what Bruce was saying. Yeah,
Towards Bruce, yes. Yeah. There's something about there's poor people. So what? Yeah, I think that's gross, honestly.
Can I say one thing
I
real
mean,
quick?
I'm all for capitalism and laissez-faire markets, but I just think that's silly.
No,
No,
the reason
I personally don't think, you know.
One second. I think Dr. Bombay was trying to talk. Some turn-off.
Yeah.
Bombay, get his voice in, and we'll move the mic around the room.
Oh, thank you very much. No, I was just confirming what Zemo was doing. I think Sime Eternal thought that Zemo was talking to him, but Zemo was actually addressing Bruce. So I don't think Zemo was actually arguing with you, Sime Eternal. He's challenging what Bruce is saying.
I was just debating the premises as they came.
Uh-huh.
But
I was
like,
so well, no, I'm speaking from a point of top-down policy as far as leveling scales from a centralized authority. As far as poor being a problem, individualistically or even in some group level, I don't think that I would say I'd like people to be poor, right? I'm also not saying we don't have an obligation to help the poor. On the other hand, we do, but leveling those scales, I find to be a relatively draconian or authoritarian measures would have to ensue for those things to occur. So the fact that people end up at different spectrums of life doesn't necessitate a leveling of scales across the board at the expense of all people. And really, what happens if we're practically speaking, the middle class will go away, and the rich will be smaller, and everyone will be poorer. Typically in those scenarios, but that's my issue.
Yeah, like what Hegel talks about.
Fair enough.
You can meet in between. You know what I mean? So
the reason why I say that is I'm just taking it to an extreme for the sake of the argument.
Your point. I really appreciate your point because, that's what a lot of people on the right worry about. Is that when socialists take control, they try to take control of all your freedoms and shit, like China.
Yeah.
Look what China looks like. China is so oppressive, and people equate the two, but you don't need to. It's not necessary to equate the two of a good healthcare system and good rights to social control. But
the argument is not the argument hasn't been like, we need to help the healthcare system improve. That's always the argument on both sides. The people would argue, right? It's larger than that. The argument's larger than that.
But the difference in arguments is funding. So the people on the right say funding should come from the private individual, while the people on the left say it should come from the society. Like you should help. Even on lesser levels.
The people on the left just don't acknowledge that society gets its funds from the private individual.
It's correct.
Of course they do.
Unless you're into a different theory.
Doodle, of course they do.
Did you listen to what he just said?
Yeah.
But
where dollars are generated in the private sector.
The right thinks that the funds should come from the private individual, and the left thinks that the funds should come from society.
Can I say one thing real quick?
Society meaning the collective.
As opposed to from the private individual. Well, the society gets its money from the private individual.
We can do this reductio ad absurdum and say there's technically public parts are private. You can even say roads are therefore private. He's clearly not saying that the funding doesn't come from the individuals in the society. He's saying that the funds coming from society are entirely different than those funds that are given off by individual hands.
Yeah, but as individually, everyone pays tax. So
are we passing the mic around?
Yeah, Nevik wants to go.
But I mean. But it's just like the individual should fund their own healthcare. That's like what the right kind of says is. But obviously, if people know money, what do you think they should go? Roll in the fucking grave and die?
Do you think are you willfully ignorant or just ignorant generally because you're in the UK?
Bruce,
Because most states,
let's not.
Most states.
I don't care about that. I don't care about that.
Well, I'm just wondering because most states.
Don't say ignorant.
What do you
No,
mean?
I don't care. I don't care.
I mean, it is ignorant to say that the people in the United States with income issues don't have access to health care. I mean, that's false, verifiably false.
No, but I thought.
No, it just ruins their life.
Are you kidding me?
No.
No, I thought if you
every state manages health care for people in need. Not to mention, there's a federal level of health care as well.
So, if, for example, in
so now we're going to start talking, moving a goalpost on what considered to be health care.
No,
he's bringing example. Go on.
Okay, so real quick before, and then after this, I think Nevik goes because he wanted to say something. I want to say, so in many parts of the country, where, for example, people don't have a state-run Medicaid. You can't just get Medicaid if you're a healthy adult who's just not making enough. It becomes a question of, do I go and get checkups and screenings for breast cancer, or do I go and get my yearly checkup, or do I have more money to make sure my kid, enjoys his life, and vice versa. These are things that people go through. This is a reduced or no real access to healthcare. When we say access to healthcare, it's saying, it's not just can I walk down the street to the store and buy it. It's to have the financial means.
I agree. It's not.
Right.
I'm not saying that.
Dandan,
Not either.
That
almost all
feeds back into my point.
Every state, especially if you're looking at under the age of 23 or 25, roughly, depending on where you are, has free health care for those who are income challenged, at the very least for children. Now, when you are older, there is a whole separate set of funding available for individuals. And in a large number of states, I think it's somewhere around 70%, have this.
But with those who don't?
I'm not saying there are those who don't, but what I'm trying to say is this general idea that the United States.
Don't you think?
No. The idea that.
You think it should be federal?
No, I don't. Because the United States is a state of.
No. Let me interrupt a second, please.
Because this will go into.
This gets to the heart of the argument, yeah. Because don't you think it's a human right for healthcare that those in poverty deserve help? Don't you think it should be a right written federally?
No.
You just agreed with
because then the question will be, shouldn't there be something globally, right? Is that the next answer? Is that the next tier? What's after that? What's after that? I guess solar system wide. Is that the next step?
Aliens show up to our planet, and then we have to provide.
One second, let Kevin go next. Let Kevin go next.
Yes. Have you ever seen the movie District 9?
No. Go ahead, Nivik. He's been waiting. Sorry.
No, I was just saying, did you notice when I said might makes right person, being unfair is unfair? Bruce said, well, opposing fairness is might makes right. But I mean, like if you're opposing fairness, I mean, well, if you're pro freedom with the belief to not impose on another, that's justified to impose on you, because it's contradicting, because you're talking about.
What's justified to impose on someone?
No, I said. Did you notice when I said to a might makes right person, fairness is being fair is unfair, and Bruce said, well, imposing fairness is might makes right, but I'm just my point is like, well, if you're
imposes on the rights of other people.
So,
that's correct.
I get what you're saying.
Hey, did you guys?
But I'm saying that's valid. I'm saying that's valid to do that.
Yeah. No, that's a good question.
Because I mean, like, it's contradicting to say you're about freedom and stuff, but that's the right answer. I mean,
to put it in other words, the right to impose your own freedom on others, your opinions on others, can restrict other people's freedom.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, like, the response.
The people
to that
people are
right
also
response.
free. Well, but then we're not talking about the same sort of free association that's not available to the individual and the state, unless you're going to start bringing up the social contract theory, which I would say is also ridiculous.
I don't think it's ridiculous. I think
how do we parse this criticism? Then how far do we take these rights? Do we apply them globally, universally?
Let me ask another question, please. Sorry to
which
interrupt,
rights?
but it's like this gets hard. So
Yeah, which
don't
rights?
you think healthcare is a human right? I think
no, I don't.
No.
So
we've already been through this. Simon,
you're not going to get no.
Not everybody agrees that
if you
healthcare is a human
saw
right.
a person, if you saw a person
Why
dying
is it
on the
human
street
right?
from a health, if you're seeing a person on the street dying from a healthcare condition,
that's not going to work, man.
Him.
Listen, it doesn't
Sympathy.
matter.
That's a different issue, dude.
The question has already been asked. Some people view it as natural. Some people don't. Simply asking him those questions isn't going to make him suddenly change his mind. Sorry.
No, but I mean, I'll ask him other rhetorical questions, like if it's a child dying from
I understand what you're saying.
Okay, you can even say babies.
So
how about that?
Here's a funny thing.
Cool. Now do abortion.
Yeah. So the farther a person do abortion, the farther a person gets away from you in location and in similarity, the less likely you are to give a shit about whether they die. So if I'm a white person in America and some black baby's dying of AIDS in Africa, I'm not entirely inclined to get on a plane and hop over there and hand them a couple of pills.
Until you cry about your job being shipped overseas.
It's because you've been desensitized to by society.
But no. If somebody close to me is sick, then I want to help them a lot more.
Yeah.
If I actually see somebody suffering, I want to help them because they're right next to me.
Why can't you apply that humanity to the person abroad?
To that question, who do you let live in your house?
Yeah, how many people let live in your house? Yeah.
How many people see to your house?
Until you see your job being shipped overseas. Let's narrate this. Can we narrate this?
Jobs being shipped overseas.
I think
what are you talking about?
I think that it's not about, I don't think there really needs to be a moderation so far. People are having, I think it's been
we're good.
decently. I think it's been decently okay.
But I'm just saying, like if a person can get paid for pennies in another country.
Should a person that doesn't provide enough monetary resources for the world to where they require to have their healthcare paid for, and another person that provides more resources to the world where he is paying for his own healthcare and being forced to pay for other healthcare, the second guy that provides resources that lives a healthy lifestyle, should he be forced to pay for the healthcare for an obese man?
Well, that's what happens.
A man that chooses to eat.
How about let's go another. Let me go another level here, just to make it a little bit more clear. A third generation welfare recipient who has never had a job, and their parents never had a job, and their parents' never had a job.
I want to stick on
and none of them have ever done anything.
Hold on, let me finish my.
Everyone stop. Everybody stop. Everybody stop. Everybody stop. I'm trying to stay out of this conversation, more just moderate it. So what we should do,
it's killing you, Dan.
It's killing me. You know me. You know me, Bruce. It's so hard.
I got interrupted on mine, and nobody responded to mine. I just
but I think that
should a morbidly obese person be able to force other people to provide his health care?
Villain. You're like actually like person number 3 already moving, like consistently talking. Like it's like you're like you might have just I don't know how long you've been here, but we're already like so far ahead of this. So I think that we should.
When
go
I started
back.
speaking, everything had run to.
I'm trying to give Villain a yes and.
It's not about.
You don't have to pile on. Let him take his premise, and you can add another.
Universal health care. Should a morbidly obese person that lives his life in gluttony be allowed to force other people to provide his health care for him?
I think you should.
No, absolutely not. No, Dylan, I'm going to give you a yes and to that sentence.
But you're
like
against universal health care.
Well, not just
I'm
that.
proponing that argument to the people that are arguing for it.
Right, but not just a morbidly obese person, but how about a third generation welfare recipient where they're a long lineage of people who have never had a job.
I understand that, but the obesity is an easy point to look at. Should a fat man be able to force somebody else to pay his health insurance?
The problem is that you have a room full of fat men here.
Yeah, that's why I picked. That's
we're
why
not gonna.
I said it.
We're a little
that's
bit.
why I said it. There's a room full
wait,
of fat people
this other guy wanted to talk. This other guy wanted to talk. Who said? Yo, dude.
Yeah, I was gonna try to answer Villain's questions.
Yeah.
I was gonna respond to a few things. Well, first off, this isn't a response to that, but there's a psychological phenomenon where Bruce was talking about how there's kids in Africa that are starving, but if he saw his aunt, he'd be more inclined to help her. Yeah, this is a psychological phenomenon. You're totally detached from people that are far away. Like if you see this kid needs $1 to eat a day, huh? Like if you see like a thing that says this kid needs $1 to eat, and then they show you their brother, and it's like, oh, they both need $1 to eat. Like every person they add, you care less and less about the one individual in harm.
Not with me. I'm not like that.
It just goes, well, it's just impossible to care about everybody equally all the time as much. There's just too much shit to care about. But anyways, that's neither here nor there. Now to Villain about the, morbidly obese fat person. Okay. I don't agree with the framing of you're forcing somebody to do something. That technically is what it is. But
then why don't you agree with it?
Really not.
But no, I'll answer that. So like an example would be, okay, if I play with matches and my neighbor never plays with matches, he's super careful, and I set my house on fire, why should the person who is super careful with fire be forced to pay the taxes to put that guy's house out?
That's not how that works. Insurance.
No, he's talking about the fire department.
Not caring about the insurance.
No,
and I'm saying, hold on. I'm saying it's absolutely analogous because
that's not how that works.
Villain, you're gonna have to stop.
Not caring about the world you're in is silly.
He asked me a question.
It makes no sense.
He's asking a rhetorical question, and he's asking a rhetorical question.
It's not. He's miss. I'm going to respond. You asked me a question.
Villain, I'm going to mute you. I'm just going to mute you. I'm going to mute you. I'm going to just mute you. You need to stop. You need to stop. 1 second. Yeah, he can talk, but I want to say what I want to say.
Okay, so
I am just moderating. I'm not giving you anything.
I'm going to respond. That's not how fire insurance works.
Wow.
1 second, dude.
This is how it's not going to work. This is how it's going to work. Zemo is going to finish his main point, and then Villain is going to respond.
Go.
So I just wanted to say, if people say this isn't analogous, this isn't the same, I think it is, because with the person who's obese and the person who's playing with fire, they are both doing things to undermine their own well-being. However, in both instances, the society, you may believe they do or do not have the obligation, but they are very analogous to each other. And one more thing I wanted to say to Doolittle about this person, this third generation person who's never had a job. They don't exist. They've never existed. That is a myth. And that's all I got to say. What's your response, Villain?
Okay, so that's not how fire insurance works. For one thing, we're talking about the government buying people's health insurance. No, the government does not buy people's fire insurance. A municipality decides how much fire insurance the taxpayers are willing to uphold, and they have a standard in that community of what kind of personal liability insurance they're gonna hold. And then an insurance company comes and evaluates the city and decides how that city is holding their citizens up to their standards of personal fire liability insurance. And then the town will vote on a bond and decide how much fire equipment the city is going to be allowed to have. And then the city has to pay fire insurance for the fire department on how much liability they have. So it's a back and forth between the city and if the city is not requiring, if they're not requiring building code to be met to a certain level when people build their houses with fire extinguishers or fire suppression systems or fire hydrants in the neighborhood, then the insurance is going to require, the insurance companies are going to require a higher premium for the city to run a fire department. So the city, so your analogy is unequivalent. In one situation, the government is buying the health insurance for citizens. In the other situation, people are privately purchasing their own health insurance. Their own fire insurance, their house insurance. It's not equivalent. It's not the same thing.
I think there was a misunderstanding, as that Zemo was not talking about any type of fire health insurance. Zemo is talking about the response by a fire department to go stop the. I think that is what he was talking about. Zemo is just what he talked about. Is that what you meant?
Is that what you meant? To rebuild the house.
Yeah. No. This is what I said, Villain. I said, Villain.
Let's take a vote in here. Did he say that or not?
No, I can tell you what I said, or you can be a fucking asshole. How about that?
Now we're gonna stop. We're gonna stop.
You mentioned taxes to rebuild the house.
Okay,
sorry,
I'm gonna.
I apologize,
guys. If we're gonna talk over me, whoever next speaks over me, I'm just going to mute them.
There needs to be a little bit of talk over in order to have a good conversation. You can't be like this in.
Okay. So this is how it's gonna happen. Zemo, he's saying he's clarifying. Whether that's what you understood or misunderstood doesn't matter. What matters is what I didn't understand him saying fire insurance. Even if he did say it, that's not what my understanding. He can clarify whether he goes back in it or not. That is not what his point was. Even if he said it, he's saying that's not his point, and he wants to clarify. And we're going to move on from that. And also, Zemo, don't do that thing. Don't take it personally. If someone's being abrasive, just let it slide off.
Sorry about that.
So clarify what you meant, and then Villain, you can respond.
I was just talking about societal responses to individual problems. I wasn't thinking about insurance, even though I think that's a fair point. But if I call 911, they don't ask me, "Oh, your house is on fire." Yes. "Oh, do you have insurance?" They don't do that. So
I'll respond. The same thing happens in healthcare. If you call 911, they don't ask you if you have insurance. The emergency services come out and they take you to the hospital. But if you want to have your house rebuilt, you have to have your own insurance. And if you want to have your lifestyle choices rebuilt by the hospital through heart disease or diabetes or that sort of thing, then you're arguing that the government should pay your insurance premiums to rebuild your body. That's.
No, but what about a person who has a heart attack because of a health condition, not because of lifestyle choices?
I still don't think that.
It's going to be hard to prove. Okay, good.
It's not a good way in society to force other people to take care of other people. You just cannot conform the human heart to kindness by force. I'm saying that in those situations, there is charity to force people to pay other people's health care why we can't have that situation to where we do purchase the health care of certain individuals in society that are helpless is because when that happens, we have to start we can't draw the line between purchasing insurance for the person that's got a genetic anomaly that causes him to be helpless, or the person that just eats Doritos all day long is fat and can't and wants other people to pay for his bad health choices.
Yeah, why can't we draw that line?
When has it been drawn? Have you ever seen it been drawn?
Let me respond to it. But don't you think though, like people who are not lifestyle choices but are struggling, don't you think they should be helped?
That's where charity comes in. And
he's also not like asking. It's not talking about personal belief. He's talking about policy.
So
right?
I want to
wrong. Like
Hold on, let me answer that question.
No, I want to quickly make a
let
distinction.
me
I want to
finish
quickly
my point.
make a
Let me finish my
distinction for the
point.
room. This is, you can finish it. I'm just making a distinction
All right,
between forcing someone and someone accepting majority rule and the way in which the rules are delineated in democracy, and we agreeing to something collectively, right? So if people are against the concept of democracy, they're not against necessarily the no one's like you're not. It's not that you're being forced against your will. Your will is in contention to collective choice. Your contention is
rule.
Your collection is against. There's a difference between democracy and mob rule.
Philosophically.
But
right.
to answer what you were saying, should we help the person? That's a good question that I don't think people actually ask. They just say it and they get an emotional response, like, of course. But no, you need to actually ask that question. Should you help the glutton that's being a glutton? Should you give your resources to the glutton rather than to your child or your neighbor or people that aren't being a glutton? Should you give your resources to the immigrant that came into our states illegally? Or resources are finite. Or should you give them the resources that you have and you're going to choose to give away? Who should you give them away to? And I'm saying, no, I don't want to buy health care for a glutton or a drug user or many different people. Like, I don't have that much money to give away, and I'm going to give it away to who I want to give it away, not to somebody that's wasting their health choices.
So Villain, go ahead, and then I'll go.
Because in Britain we live in socialized healthcare. Most people don't mind how much tax they pay. You know what I mean? Most, we still vote for the system where we pay into socialized healthcare, and it's pretty decent. And if a poor person breaks arm, if they need insulin, the amount of medical so many people pay for in America, it just like bankrupts them.
So do you think that you should be able to force people that's cool. You're making the argument that you want to, and you think it's good, and that there are other people that want to. But do you think that you should be able to force people to be involved in that when they don't want to be involved in that?
I think we all have societal duty. I believe in the social contract idea that we should all help each other, but I also believe in the idea of private property. So I believe in individual rights, but I also believe we should all pay towards helping each other.
So that kind of goes into my question to Villain. And before I ask it, I want to say I have sympathy for your argument. I agree that we shouldn't be paying off every Tom, Dick, and Harry's, fucking stupid bills or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Like, I
appreciate your point too. I appreciate your point too. Like,
and I'm not, and I'm not even totally 100% on the healthcare thing. I think America's system, as it is set up now, has been set up for so long with kind of a weird, corrupt system that's worked, and now shit's really expensive. I think the expensiveness of it, things are so expensive, like they were mentioning in Europe, and EVH brought it up. We don't negotiate with drug companies and the insurance companies as well. So they'll order you to get this thing done. It's like $500. Like my grandparents had this crazy story. Like both of them went to the hospital, and one of them had 2 X-rays. They went to one guy, he did an X-ray. They told him to go to another guy, he did an X-ray. And then like they didn't know about each other's X-rays, so they're scamming these insurance companies for money, and the hospitals are like scamming off the taxpayer basically. But anyways, I say all that to say this: with this whole, like Doolittle said, this welfare queen that owns 3 Cadillacs and has 10 driver's license. That was the essential argument. And then with yours, you said something about a person 3 generations that have not worked.
Extremely straw
That's much different. That is a much different argument.
You're
that's
extremely straw manning it, like to the
I would
point
say that's not a fair
characterization. No.
Welfare queens are a thing that people talk about. So okay, I'll give them that. But
but that's not what you were saying, man.
I was talking about whether we should be paying for the X of somebody who has never worked and neither have their parents any. They haven't been taught to work as a value either.
So,
Yeah,
Nevik, guys, 1 second. Nevik, I think, has been trying to talk, and he messaged me. Nevik, is there something you want to chime in about?
No,
Kevin?
I was just saying how
if you have
other
a point to make,
countries
add it in.
we're connected. We're how we're connected. It sets a precedence of around the world where we have corporations that of other nations that go do interest for corporations to not have competition. It affects American because it doesn't want competition. It affects the American consumer in of power, and we ship our jobs and country nations doing things at its expense for the U.S. interests. In making poor vassal states. It's about Americans and the effect on Americans and where you could have people compete with Americans for cheap labor in it not being separate. It's about driving down the credit of Americans because they're not separate from the globe, and a lot of that is deliberate to affect Americans. It's not really separate.
Yeah, the whole world is interlinked. Yeah, that's what we call about globalism.
That's the whole point of
I really didn't want to, but I'm gonna just add one thing that I think was overlooked, and this is more my opinion. When we talked about the fat man who was gluttonous, or we can talk about the irresponsible man who gets addicted to drugs, or someone who exercises their vice. When we look at these things from a medical lens and we look at them from a societal lens, things like drug abuse and obesity are considered diseases. They're not, and to look at them as moments of choice and one person's will forcing another person's will, and viewing it through that lens is an archaic one that we ought to try to move away from.
Can I just respond to that real quick?
That's exactly what
Can I respond to that real quick?
Thank you for adding that, Dandan.
Can I respond to that? What about like risky lifestyle?
That's a good point. Like, where are you going to draw the line?
I guess define a risky lifestyle.
I like the orthopedic
like
surgeon
all these people
jumper.
in UFC, right? Like all these people in UFC, would they pay for their own private insurance, or would they be covered when they're training, like at 20 years old, and they're trying to make it, and they're getting their legs busted and their face busted all the time? Like, I understand that lots of people in different organizations pay for that. Like, if they wish for them to, they'll fight for UFC, they'll pay for your, for that. But if you're like learning to fight, you're taking a massive risk that requires a lot of healthcare, right? I mean, that's just, so you have to, like, some of that has to be weighed, right?
I mean, I would hope that they would have equal access to whatever medical care they would need, regardless. What we ought to build, a society with a significant amount of resources ought to be able to provide for anyone, regardless of how "quote unquote" risky their lifestyle would be, if it's something like this, and as long as it's not criminal.
Yeah, so all society should pay for wingsuit. Should pay for wingsuit jumper because that's not really criminal. If they
hit the
their face in the side of the cliff, then we should pay for that because it's not criminal.
So I got bad money.
I'm okay with that.
I'm okay with that as well.
I think that would be great.
Why?
It's fucking ridiculous.
Because
I think it would be great because
I want to know.
we can make the same argument regarding people and with any other ventures they do, whether it's I enjoy boating, and they fall off their fucking boat.
But I'm just curious why. Like, what is other than like the fact that like all healthcare should be some right? What is the reason for that? For that being okay?
People can go ahead and exercise their freedoms.
It wouldn't work.
People can go ahead and exercise their freedom and their liberty without fear.
They're afraid they'll break a
if you're
bone.
gonna talk over, you're just gonna get muted.
Hang on, I'm curious. Well, either I guess Dan or Chad both said yes. Why?
So people can go ahead and exercise their liberty to the fullest extent possible. And if you want to exercise your liberty to your fullest extent possible, even if it engages in non-criminal legal behavior that, like, we accept in society, it's not like something egregious, like, oh, you should pay for my healthcare because I tried to go ahead and murder this guy. That's a whole. But we're talking about something completely different here.
Okay,
We
well, the
shouldn't
question
enable
then
that freedom,
is
but
begging to me. I would say I have lack clarity on why that allows a person to pursue their freedom as opposed to one without that.
So if you
Okay.
know that there is some sort of, I guess for lack of a better term, a social safety net that would allow you to do things that could quite possibly be more risky, without fear of ruining your financial life or just life in general, or putting in this case the financial lives of the loved ones around you at risk, I don't see how that doesn't help you pursue these goals and pursue these freedoms.
Pursuing goals are tied to money. Is that right?
Liberty, of course. We live in a
It's only
capitalist
a financial.
society.
It's only a financial.
Yeah, I was going to say in our capitalist
one other
society,
question
absolutely yes.
Is it only a financial concern?
Well, so in a capitalist society, finances, not only are they incentives, this is how we penalize people. Money and its object and its relation to us is entirely intrinsic.
Yeah.
I just want to get to. Okay, go ahead. That's fine. I'll let Villain go. He's got a point.
No, I was pointing out that Dandan's moderating like crazy, but there's two people that wanting to talk, not me, and you're talking whenever you want to talk, Dandan.
No, this is the first time I want to talk. That's why I said I know I'm breaking a bit of thing. I haven't really done this before, but I'll go back to just sitting on the sideline if it's bothering people. I just wanted to chime in because I thought
it would seem to me that
we want opinions, Dan.
It would seem to me that there's some distinction. There's some distinction being drawn.
Where Dantan can just press a button and talk, and then let other people talk when he's done. I think
there's like a stage format, right? There's a different format in here that can do that. Anyway, it seems to me that there's some distinction being made between where the freedom to do something comes in truly, like whether or not you are free to act without dollars being taken or utilized in some way or being ruled by a collective, and then where is the freedom? So it seems to me there's a limitation to the freedom that you're affording people.
I guess what do you mean? It seems there's a limitation that we're affording people? Who, me?
Yeah, it seems like in that situation, you're saying you are free to pursue what you wish to pursue and you find valuable. And we'd say in capitalism,
life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Yes.
Yeah. So in other words, we said like in the market, for instance, you're free to use your dollars or support the company freely. So and that's how the market works out, right? So, but it seems to me that that's only within the confines of the freedoms that the freedom that you put up around the democratic rule that you've created, right?
I'm not following. Is this a movement towards like talking about positive rights again, or?
It seems to me that there's freedom, and then there's freedom within the system. You see what I mean?
Yeah, clearly.
I would say yes. All systems have rules. I guess I'm not sure where you're going with this.
I just don't think that that we're talking about the same freedom. That's all.
Oh, well, maybe not. Yeah, I'm going to sit on the sidelines for a little while and I guess maybe listen in. Maybe we can get to a more cognizant point.
The point is there's freedom or there's freedom or there's regulation. And you're advocating for regulation, and somehow regulation creates freedom. That's what's interesting to me.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I mean,
I would disagree with that.
It's about fairness and justice in society. Yeah.
There's regulation to prevent murder, and that limits our ability to freely murder, right?
It doesn't prevent murder, though. It doesn't prevent it.
I mean, it's our feeble human attempt to do so.
It penalizes an action. It doesn't actually give the option to live. It just penalizes those that end the life.
If you want freedom to be and unfair, then that's not then that's contradicting.
So this
That's
is
why
a
we
question.
have
It's
rules.
a question to look at: are there policies and regulations in place to prevent murder? Do we have these? Are these a part of our current establishments? Before we say there isn't, let's ponder on that.
Attempts to prevent something will ultimately infringe on someone as well.
Is that necessarily a bad thing?
Well, that's the question. And I would say if freedom is the goal, now I'm not actually advocating for this point. I mean, I'm kind of devil's advocating a little bit, but
If
that's
that
not
person
freedom.
hurts the group, yeah.
Right?
If that person harms the group, yeah. And then if we have a democracy, it's about the well-being of us all being a collective.
But that's not.
You oppose on that person because they're about.
So you're
doing
not
things
interested in
that is
freedom. You're
not
only
that is not
interested
good
in the
for the
imposition
group.
of the society.
Well, yeah, we're a democracy. We're a group.
Has there been a society where there has never been any imposition?
That's a good point. I don't know that there has been, but I'm just curious around where the distinction lies because it's hard for people to understand. There's hard for people to understand freedom versus some other confined system of freedom, right? So, like, you could play a game that's free world, like I don't know, like what GTA or something, but there's all sorts of limitations within that world, right? And there's limitations on Earth, right, because of the physics issue, right, or anything else. So, what is freedom? And then it's not actually freedom at all. It's some system of order that's being established by an entity that's not necessarily natural.
It's a conversation we're having with the mask. If people saying like I should wear a mask, it should be my right to wear a mask and whether I want. It's not about your right to wear a mask. It's about you not wearing a mask and it affecting affecting another person. So you're crying about the freedom of wearing a mask.
Fine, that's fine, but that's not that's fine if people were saying such a thing. But folks aren't saying such. They're not saying.
If it hurts the group, then yeah, we impose on you.
That's not freedom. That's not freedom.
Yeah.
Well, what you're doing isn't freedom.
That is agency within. That is agency within a system established.
What you're doing isn't freedom.
Let's first of all then let's instead of just using the word freedom, let's try to give it some sort of boundaries. So I'm gonna start, and then within we can move on from there. So I conceptualize freedom as not only from things, but also to. Freedom is not one directional. It has two directions, away from stuff and to stuff. And at a certain point, these two overlay. When you have freedom from everything, you have freedom to nothing. And when you have freedom for when you have everything, you don't have freedom from anything. So in both, this paradox exists for a reason. And when we look at freedom, we have to conceptualize it in both perspectives. One, freedom for things, freedoms to pursue my life and the ability to do that fairly and justly and as much as we can extend it. At the same time, freedom from coercion is just as important part of conceptualizing freedom. That's how I view it, at least. And we can move that around.
That's I mean, for me, it's kind of like the paradox of choice. If you ever heard of that, like the more choices you have, the harder it is to make one. You get paralyzed by it. You go on the cereal aisle. Used to be 20 cereals. It's pretty easy to pick one you like. Now there's 500. You have fear of missing out. All these weird psychological things happen. But and I appreciate that point. And it's kind of what Rousseau, Jean-Jacques Rousseau said. He said when authority became illegitimate, is that what he said? Something along those lines?
Yes.
It went from so that kind of gets me to Bruce. Like Bruce is talking about freedom, and I think we agree freedom is a good thing, but I think how you were using it was a little bit obtuse. So I think it's good we're kind of narrowing down on it. So for me, they're like what Rousseau said, there are legitimate regulations, or this is what I'm gathering. There seems to be legitimate regulations, like you can't murder people. And then there seems to be scary top-down regulatory regulations, such as healthcare and overhaul of the entire system and how will this interfere with people's things. So there's, it all comes down to what's the authority on what them saying to do so is. Like, the housing regulation is very important. The people that work on houses aren't the best people all the time. They'll do crazy shit. You buy a house 5 years from now, something could go wrong. That's against your rights. They have less freedom, but it's to protect your freedom from buying a shitty house. So yeah, I think like it's important what you said, Bruce, like to establish why something
right. And I think
be
right. And the reason why it's important is to ensure that people aren't being tricked, coerced, or otherwise misled on something they may agree to fundamentally. So like, it's not free, it's constrained in some way. And I don't think people show their true colors when they start discussing such things.
So Bruce, what's your view with the Confederacy?
Wait 1 second.
You believe that imposing on them was imposing on their freedom?
Before we move to the Confederacy, I think I heard someone's voice in there. Want to say something else? Who was that voice that I heard?
So I'm curious as to how Bruce is defining freedom, because it seems to me that you're making an absolutist argument that freedom either is or isn't, and there isn't really degrees. For instance, if you get dropped in the middle of the Sahara Desert, you're potentially the freest you could ever possibly be. You're free to, live your life how you want within the confines of that, but you're also free to be attacked by the Tuareg-like desert people or starve or dehydrate to death. Within civil society, though, I'm not sure, since humans are a social being, unless you're a hermit in the forest, your freedom is constrained. There's constraints, there's social pressures of living in a family even that are informal, that restricts your freedom to do things to other family members. So you can't just like kind of go around as if you're just a singular autonomous agent and that nothing else has anything to do with you. And I'm not sure that any society has ever really achieved that. And even the anarchists particularly grapple with this question of absolute freedom. And one person who talked about it a lot and who's really insightful in this would be Mikhail Bakunin, who's a Russian anarchist.
I lost you there.
You mind going back 5 seconds?
Sure. You cut off.
Okay. So
Mikhaev, I don't remember what's something you said.
Mikhail Bakunin, who's a Russian anarchist. He writes extensively on freedom and the tyranny of the state, but even he runs into the issue of how do you guarantee an absolute anarchy, in the sense that everyone has the right to do with each other, because eventually you get down to some sort of regulation in order to maintain that status quo, and so that political power or economic power doesn't coalesce into one group, and then it just kind of just naturally devolves into some feudalistic society. For instance, like if you lived in Rousseau's time under the French king, a peasant would not have their freedom to sell their labor under the corvée system. So the king, if they wanted to, would just say, "Hey, peasant, build this road," and that's how roads under the French system were done. Likewise, you would not have the freedom to own property under the French aristocratic system, because technically the king owned all of France, and in part of that, the king owned all the people living in France. So, like to say that there is either freedom or isn't freedom is ignoring the history that certain people have had more freedoms and certain people have had less freedoms. And even if you go back to the pharaohs, like there is some freedoms, but it's limited. I'm not sure that any society has ever really been able to achieve a fully absolute freedom where there isn't some sort of constraint.
What's the point?
Unless you're feudal-minded in your thinking.
Are you saying that because no society has be able to create freedom in this way, that having a notion of absolute freedom is somehow incongruent with the way in which it even exists, and it's just what are you trying to say?
So yeah, you can get down into that. I think that absolute freedom is pretty abstract, but when it comes down to the practicality and the history, no one has ever been absolutely fully fully free. Even like if we talk about monarchs who had the freedom to do basically whatever they want, they were still limited because they were the head of state. There were certain responsibilities that if they didn't tend to, they would have major repercussions, especially if you're talking about like Tsar Nicholas right before the Russian Revolution.
So you're saying that absolute freedom doesn't actually exist in any.
Yeah, I'm not sure I could point to any singular society where absolute freedom has ever been achieved. There's degrees to freedom in the lived experience of freedom.
Okay.
He kind of made a mention of you can have a power grow too big and then imposing and then become absolute in power and then imposing a type of hierarchy feudal system on you within you, and and that's a problem.
It's kind of like Lord of the Flies, where they try to have like an equal society and with relative freedoms, but it devolves in power, coalesces into certain factions. Yeah,
it never works out. It seems like this freedom is like just a shiny, untouchable, unnameable void of, I don't know. I mean, it's a good ideal to strive for, but.
Well, see, that's what I'm getting to.
That's why I brought up the Confederacy.
And that's what
the elite.
1 second, I think Bruce is trying to clarify his point. I think Bruce is trying. Are you saying that this ideal might not exist, but conceptually, it is an ideal that we should strive for no matter what?
Yeah, I would. That's correct. That's my presupposition.
That this is an ideal which might or might not exist, but striving for that ideal is the ultimate goal, in a sense.
Right.
So we're really talking about most freedom, not just like freedom as a.
Yeah, and then you have to decide what. So this is and this is where the end pass comes in, where it seems to me like someone like Dandan would say, well, I am helping people be more free by removing barriers of life, right, or woes that may arise outside of their control. Right? It's kind of what it sounds like. Whereas I would say, I would remove as much imposition outside of somebody's voluntary action to achieve that freedom.
So going back into the context of healthcare in New York City, it's about $2,000 to $3,000 for an ambulance to pick you up and deliver you. I don't really want to live in a society where I am free to get the ambulance, but not free of economic destitution, to the point where New York City residents will be injured by, say, a car crash or a bicycle running into them, and then say, please don't call the ambulance, I can't afford it. That I would like a freedom of having ambulances be cost effective to the point where if I'm in an emergency, I would like to not have to pay through the nose in order to fix my nose, but if that means that I have to pay $10 more in taxes as like a collective entity of New York City residents, I'm better with that than having an event that I cannot predict or prepare for just completely ruin set me back economically. So I would either fall into the hole of poverty, which is really hard to crawl out of, or so that's. And I think a lot of the arguments for Medicare is not talking about, Kylie Jenner's plastic surgery, but like people who really need subsidized emergency help.
Okay, sure. And so let me clarify on that, or at least meet you halfway on that. We both agree on the problem, I think, right? Which is what you laid out. I think what we disagree is on the top-down solution.
So this is always an interesting point that maybe not you, but people of the GOP kind of say that they know what they don't want, but I'm interested in what solution beyond what the system already is, or like what solution other than top down would you propose?
A market system that allows such freedom to exist for people to to selectively choose. But also, there's another caveat to this. When you say ambulance, it's not just a vehicle that shows up and takes you somewhere, right? Because if that's the case, then we have solutions for that. And I would say that solution is pretty cheap.
So if
you're talking about a regular car,
Any or
driver.
van or whatever the case is, right? So like a market system approach.
Yeah, but
as
if a
opposed to
person, if the
something else.
person's asking the
Call it
cops,
Uber.
don't call an ambulance. The reason why the cop wants to call an ambulance because the person is injured, and injury is, to gamble with them and to have someone
I
drive
get
you
it.
is an unbelievable gamble.
No. What if there were an ambulance? What if there's Uber ambulance? Not interested in that, or a taxi ambulance?
It's just going to end up costing like an ambulance.
No, it would not have to. It wouldn't have to. The ambulance prices are largely an impact of the regulatory body that consists of, and the insurance pricing. Like their price is not set by the market.
Because
ambulances
it's not subjected to market curves. Villain go.
Ambulances lose money on 911 response. They don't make money on that. The way ambulance companies make money is through medical transport. So, ambulance company will get a contract for an area, and they'll, as long as they meet their requirements for the governing body, they keep that contract. How they make money is having their name out there, and then they're able to like provide wheelchair transport to hospital services, and that's where they make their money. 911 ambulance service is usually a net loss. And the reason why EMS can't work that way is like going back to how fire departments used to run. Like you used to buy fire insurance, and the fire department would come to the places that had insurance under there. But how that worked out is sometimes that would two fire departments would show up at a fire, and this is actual history. The fire departments would literally get in fist fights in the street over which department got to have the right to put that fire out. But let me ask you guys this: if there was a situation to where, let's say, ambulance service was free, it was a societal cost, could people opt out? If say you didn't like wearing a seatbelt or you didn't like wearing a helmet, could you have the freedom to make that choice for yourself without getting ticketed by the state? But if you got in an accident without wearing a seatbelt or a helmet, then the community no longer is responsible for that bill for that ambulance service.
No way. I can't see that playing out that way. I can't see there not being a penalty for taking the precaution that's required of you. In that system.
Why can't you opt out? Like, why do you have to do what everybody else
try to opt out now?
No,
I don't see that getting any better.
Could we have that happen?
I mean, you can
hypothetically, yes.
Like, do I have to? Like, you're seeing this stuff come up in societies where like they have the snack taxes and the soda limitations and the insane tobacco taxes,
right.
where they're trying to deal with that issue because they're trying to universalize healthcare. But in order to do that, you have to limit freedom. So if we want to cut the cost of the society's obligation to pay for lung disease, then they're going to have to look at mediating causes of lung disease, and often that's a choice. The same thing with obesity and diabetes, with gluttony or poor nutrition choices. You can either have security or freedom. Like it's on a scale. So if you are given the security of free healthcare, then you're by necessity they're going to have to limit freedom. You're not going to be able to have to drink a 2-liter of soda with your restaurant dinner, or you're not going to be able to smoke 2 packs a day. Like it's a give and take. And what I'm saying is that a lot of you are arguing for the safety side of it, like the universal healthcare side of it. But shouldn't the people that prefer freedom have the option to opt out of your system?
I'm not answering because I'm not proposing this system. Someone else would.
There's always quiet when you talk to the people that are really strongly proponing for like extreme like social safety measures.
Yeah.
When it comes to like, what about somebody that just doesn't want to be a part of that? Can they opt out?
I mean,
There's
you
no
can
way. I've never
you
heard
can
that.
still
I've never heard
technically
anyone.
opt out. There's just going to be consequences. You know?
That's
Of
not
course.
opting
Now we're
out.
there.
That's coercion, and that's forcing them to be a part of it.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, is coercion the worst thing to happen?
It's pretty bad, dude.
I mean, if you get a ticket for not wearing a helmet because it endangers yourself and other people,
No,
is that
no. Not wearing a helmet does not endanger other people.
is there no scenario in which not wearing a helmet could endanger other people?
If you want to argue the exception, argue the exception. I'll listen. I'll hear, but don't act like the exception would create the rule. If there's some extreme anomaly to where somebody without a helmet hurt somebody else because he wasn't wearing a helmet, let's hear it. But that doesn't change the rule that not wearing a helmet is a risk to yourself. It's not a risk to other people. You can argue that not wearing a seatbelt could be a risk to other people because then you become a projectile in the vehicle and you can severely hurt the other people in the car.
Let's say speeding. Let's say I don't feel the 75. I'm not a big fan. I'm gonna go 95.
No. Wait a second. You're the one that just asked me that question about the helmet, right?
No, someone else did.
No, that was me.
It was EVH.
Can that person respond to that? Like, what scenario is not wearing a helmet going to hurt somebody else?
I don't know, man. A bug flies in your eye and you go and swerve onto the other side of the road. Like, wear a monitor or a visor or something like that.
Do you see? So that's a different. That's not a helmet issue. That's an eye protection issue. Do you see people riding on the highway without helmets, without wearing goggles or sunglasses?
Sometimes.
So that would be an extreme exception, though. So
EVH.
Not necessarily.
EVH. Do you think it's okay if we go ahead with like the premise of like speeding and
yeah, sure.
Okay, yeah. So me and EVH, we don't really like the speed limit laws. We're gonna go 95. We're gonna opt out. That would endanger other people's lives. What do y'all think about that?
Doesn't necessarily. We could control the lane laws to where if you're driving 55 in the fast lane, you're causing an impediment to traffic. Like, let's make the outside lane be a speedless lane or a higher speed lane.
Yeah, they have that in Germany. Well, they have the whole highway's fast, but yeah.
Hold up on.
Yes.
So
it seemed to me to the bedrock of his point.
If you were allowed to opt out of the Medicare system or the socialized healthcare system, would you be then okay with it?
Yeah, let other people do whatever the hell they want to. But the reason why they won't let people opt out is because more and more people opt out, and it collapses. It's when you slide towards that end of like social service and safety, like like the reason why communism and capitalism is fighting for the whole world needs to be communist or the whole world needs to be capitalist, because communism doesn't work unless there's nowhere for people to escape it. They have to be forced to submit to it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not advocating for communism.
Well, I'm making an analogy.
Why is not necessarily the case?
If you allow people to opt out of socialized healthcare, then the system won't work. They need everybody in there. And specifically, the people that are opting out are people that are going to take care of themselves, and they're providing surplus value. It's not the people that are in need of healthcare that aren't providing for themselves. So the reason why they won't let people opt out is because the people that are taking care of themselves are needed to be forced into that system in order to provide the resources to make the system work.
It would seem to me that it's treated similarly.
I understand where you're coming from, and it sounds fairly reasonable.
It would seem to me that the argument would be similar to you can't opt out of the military's defense, right? Like that, the defense provided to the border of the United States or your state border is not something you can opt out of. right? So the tax dollars that you spend go to defense. There's no way to opt out of that, and you benefit from it. So that would be the argument.
But everybody in a society
get,
universally benefits from military defense in the same amount.
Don't you get fined here in the U.S. if you don't have health insurance of some kind?
They changed that. It used to be that was there for a little while.
That's true. That's true. It's still there.
What? No, it's not. The ACA removed that restriction. I thought.
You still have to file when you're with your tax returns whether you have healthcare.
I have to double check. You might be right about that, man. Yeah, you are right about that.
This rings a bell for me also about like car insurance too. Like, why should you be forced to have car insurance?
Some states don't force you to. Some states allow you to pay a fee of uninsured motorist, which is like usually astronomical. It's like $3,000 to $10,000 depending on where you are. And then it's a one time.
You can also claim that you're self-insured, and you have to have $50,000 in an account that's a special kind of account.
Yeah, is that not some form of coercion?
But you have to have auto
taxes
insurance.
are too.
Yeah.
Fucking hate that.
But you have to have. You had to have auto insurance because, if you wreck into somebody's shit and it's your fault and you can't pay for it and they're out,
honestly,
however much
cheaper
money.
Anyway, isn't it?
But one of the negative things about forcing people to have car insurance is that gives the insurance company a negative incentive to not control their prices, to where if a lot of people, if insurance gets too high, they're just like, fuck it, I can't afford it. I'm going to drive and I'm just going to be safe. I'm going to take the risk on myself. And if I get fucked, that's going to fuck my life. They might take my house.
Social regulated health insurance.
They should. The fact that people can't opt out of car insurance gives the incentive for insurance companies to band together and have higher premiums.
Yeah. Imagine if insurance was required, but you owe $3,000 a month. No one would be able to live.
Well, that does exist for people that are high risk, right? For people that have whatever, depending on the state, like large number of points on your license, lots of accidents, lots of claims. Like home insurance works this way too, right? If you make so many claims, they'll either drop you or raise that premium pretty high, where it becomes like, well, I'm not getting much from my insurance anyway. I'm just gonna have to start putting dollars in some sort of savings for these problems.
Wait,
that does occur, right?
Are you speaking, because I understand what Doolittle was talking about because I spoke to him earlier. Are you speaking about a state where the free market economy will be 100% free, no state interference, so you won't have a mixed economy, or will yours be a little bit mixed with some state interference?
What, me?
Yes, well, you and Villain and I think it was EVH.
I would say
Toad. I'm just curious.
I'd say mostly no state interference outside of maybe contractual enforcement. There could be a couple of agencies that we fund through taxes. So maybe like defense, maybe EPA, depending on regulatory reasoning. It's reasonable regulation. But so I would say, but mostly, 95%, whatever the percentage would be, without intervention.
I see where you're going. Okay.
But for insurance is it's like the market is manipulated, and then also like the insurance itself have a number of these caveats. So there is there's opt out, but it's sometimes not even possible, or if it is, it's pretty cost prohibitive.
Let me ask you guys that are arguing for social safety networks to be enforced. If we have social health care, if somebody is living a lifestyle to where they don't exercise in a way or they eat in a way that causes health issues or obesity, should the state be able to fine them for not following a healthy diet or not following an exercise routine?
I think what the state would end up doing. Oh no, go ahead, social people.
Sorry. I'm actually, I'll fly the banner for the social JWs. In that case, the state would have a problem because that unfit fat person had also been contributing to the state through taxes. So what law would the state use to suddenly deprive that person of something they've been paying for anyway through taxes?
The person that drives a a vehicle without a seatbelt or rides a motorcycle without a helmet is also contributing to the state through taxes. So should somebody that's living an unhealthy lifestyle, should the state be able to fine them for that if they're receiving social health care?
I would disagree with the approach. I think there's different incentives that would work better other than fining.
I made that argument.
I would think that's what would happen, right?
And you guys argued against that.
I would see that. I would see that there would be some situations where you're incentivized to give or to be healthy or whatever the case. But it would also seem to me that there would still be some penalty. But go ahead, Eddie Van Halen. Sorry.
They did this in New York, a health tax on junk food.
They did.
Taxes on like individual items ever really have the effect? Because like they tax cigarettes, and I'm just like, fucking cigarettes are more expensive. Goddamn.
Those are tax on the poor. They're all taxes on the poor. Like almost every tax is a tax on the poor. To be honest,
your moral perspectives, because you're making moral perspectives on why this stuff should be done. I'm not asking you if it would work or how the perfect system should work. Those of you that believe that it's morally justified to force people to take part in a universal health care, do you think that it would be morally justified for the government to fine people that were living an unhealthy lifestyle?
That's way more complicated than your seatbelt, Dylan. That's way more complicated than your seatbelt.
I'll just give him a straight answer. In my opinion, no. It would be much more morally beneficial if the state helped to educate them to stop living that life.
I'm not asking how to solve the situation.
I'm not saying fine. I'm saying
moral perspective. So
my moral perspective is no. Yeah.
Well, Villain, I'm not anybody who's really hard line on this socialized.
That's too complicated.
Healthcare.
That's not possible.
I think if if there's anything that should be socialized, it should probably be healthcare. But it's also a tough puzzle. But to answer your question, I think if you're going to enforce people to have a helmet on and all this, that at a certain point you should be able to enforce that if they're getting socialized medicine. I think that would stay correct to someone whose premise is that of someone that has that. That's just my opinion. But it's easier to enforce like individual acts, like, oh, you have a helmet or you don't have a helmet. But if like over 20 years you slowly gain 2 pounds each year, and you know what I mean, like that's a lot more arbitrary. Because there's people that aren't fat that eat like shit and have clogged up cholesterol, and there's people that have brain tumors that are. With health, it's a lot more complicated when you start talking about the human body.
What you can eat and what you can't eat. Yeah, it's too complicated.
No, it's not. It's really simple because you can say like
compared to a seatbelt,
smoke a cigarette. So if you smoke a cigarette, you get
how do you draw a line with your food?
Or it's unhealthy to eat processed
anything.
food.
Anything. Too much of anything is bad.
We're gonna. You guys think this is unhealthy? Like, I mean, it's too complicated. We'll see this more and more in the next coming years and decades. They're going to start.
We can figure that out.
Just like they're starting it already. They're putting insane taxes on cigarettes. They're putting sugar taxes on snacks and that sort of thing. You've seen many cities tell people how big of a soda they can buy from a restaurant. It's happening already, and it will happen
with your
more
insurance,
and more.
it's like that, though.
It's happened already in
the
United Kingdom. It happened a while ago. They called it the sugar tax. Has it made much of a difference? Not really.
And it'll keep increasing.
Tax on the poor.
They're going to say
that is a tax on the poor.
Muffins can't have this amount of sugar content in them, and there's a pattern, and it will.
It's like an insurance. You certain things within you, like you when your insurance and covers life insurance covers you. You certain ways you go about living. It's
as
taken
a society,
under consideration.
Okay, yeah, and as a society, let's move this idea forward. What levers, what mechanisms do we have to try to make sure that the population eats healthy? What can we do through communal action, right? Since we all agree that a society with healthy people would be better, what can we actually do other than just lift our hands up and say, well, let people live as they want to live, and
that is the answer.
No, I believe in education from school level, providing information.
How's
there
that the answer?
Be a way to provide, because if people know
not you, Villain.
Yeah, but but Bombay
What'd
is
you say,
talking right
Nivik?
now.
Okay, never mind.
No, you're derailing the conversation. Let's move on.
Sorry, yep. It was just in answer to your question, Don. I tried to address it earlier, I think, when I was talking directly with Villain when he asked his question. I don't believe just saying, well, that's the way people are, so put a tax. I believe education is the key. By educating the young, by providing information for the adults, they will know that what they're doing can be harmful and it will reduce. I'm not saying every single one of them will suddenly take that information and adhere to it, but it will reduce the problems that you have with whether it's tobacco, whether it's with sugar, consumption of sugar, providing the information there for the
what
for
the soft
society.
Yeah, go ahead, Bombay. I'm sorry.
No, that's it. I've finished.
The implication that I hear in that, and I don't want to forgive me for putting words in your mouth, but the implication I hear with that is that education means eventually we'll be sure that we re-educate and stop these silly theists from pushing their ideology. But that's just that's my
what
that's
I
my
hear
my
at the
lens.
core of your argument is control. You're talking about
All right, I gotta go, guys.
helping
Sorry.
people by controlling them. You're talking about you're asking as though you're offering information, but the way you talked about implementing it would be forcing people to learn it in public school systems and indoctrinating them and controlling what they think. Yes,
Is it indoctrination to teach someone that sugar is at excessive amounts very
it's an
unhealthy?
indoctrination to put them somewhere where they have to be, and you get to control the curriculum. It's not indoctrination to let people be free and just offer your voice. Like, hey, if you'd like to learn this or offer this book.
I don't understand what you mean by indoctrination, as I've always understood indoctrination as teaching people to think uncritically.
No, teaching people to think what you want them to think. The public school system is an indoctrination center. It's deciding what people should think and making them learn it.
Is that true of the private school system too?
It would be an indoctrination by their parents if their parents are the ones choosing to put them in there. Then and indoctrination isn't always bad, I don't think. Depending on, I think it's always bad if the state is doing it. But yes.
So
because for you, any type of passing on knowledge is indoctrination.
No. Forcing
that's what I don't understand what you mean.
Forcing people to learn. Like you can write a book and leave it on a counter, and somebody can read that. And that's not indoctrination. They're free to read it or not read it. But once you put somebody in a school system and they have a curriculum that is not of their choice, and they don't get to choose the things that they put their mental energy towards.
But villain. If I'm a villain,
how you can decide is there control, force, or coercion involved? If that's involved, then it's indoctrination.
Villain. Okay, so if I'm in the fifth grade and the teacher decides to teach me, I don't know, about just whatever, and because I don't have input on what they teach me, I'm being indoctrinated.
Yes,
that's kind of a silly. That's a very silly argument.
Why is it silly?
Because if I'm in fifth grade, how am I going to know what should be in the curriculum better than the other people?
You're not.
Okay. So somebody has to determine a curriculum. So if Thomas Sowell, when he was being taught under Milton Friedman, was he being indoctrinated by Milton Friedman? Because Milton didn't let him do whatever he wanted to do. He came to his own opinions.
Thomas Sowell freely put himself under the teaching of Milton Friedman.
Okay, but in his class, was he free to say, Milton, you recommended these books, but I'm not feeling them.
That's a straw man. If he didn't feel them, he could leave the class.
No.
I would say that uneducating a child will completely eviscerate any freedoms that child has.
That has nothing to do with what we're talking about. We're talking about indoctrination.
One second. That in order to be free to begin with, you have to be able to understand and know the world around you. I would also say that the way in which you define indoctrination makes it kind of very obtuse. As when I say indoctrination, I mean teaching someone to think uncritically. And I think that anytime someone learns, even when it's involuntary, it doesn't mean that it's indoctrination. To put voluntarism under as a deciding factor between what is indoctrination, what isn't indoctrination, neuters the term in the same way that wokeist people on the left call everything racist.
Well, that's because you're applying a negative term to the word indoctrination. It's a neutral term, but often it's a negative thing.
No, he made a good point.
When the state is doing it, it's negative. When a loving father is indoctrinating his child, that's not a negative thing. Well, unless the father's an idiot.
Yeah,
just like the reason why religions have doctrine, it's the set standards of beliefs. So religious people wouldn't think that indoctrinating their followers with the doctrine would be a bad thing. You might because you're an atheist, but you think your religious
no, I don't think it's. I don't
humanism.
I think that you can teach religion through indoctrination, and you can think. I think you can teach you can teach religion using indoctrination. You can also teach religion through a critical lens.
Indoctrination.
I
don't agree. I don't agree.
Wait. So why is it okay when the dad does it, but not the state?
If it's a loving father, that's
what if it's a loving state?
There is no loving state.
Well, why? Like any state can't be loving.
The state is not an entity. It's a state is not a person. A state cannot. An abstract idea cannot perform an action like love.
Can a group not be loving? For example, like my family is a group which is loving.
The state does not love you.
Does my family not love me either?
The question of does the state love you is an irrational question. It's foolish to even ask something like that. No, the state does not love you.
You mentioned earlier that some forms of indoctrination you didn't have a problem with them. You said that not all on indoctrination was bad. So when is it not bad in your opinion? I'd like to
know. When it's by the child's loving guardian.
So why can't the guardian be
the state? Is their guardian?
The state is not a person.
Okay, let's say they live in a government housing system. Like you're looked after by a person who's funded by the state.
I also want to remind everyone that we're still live. And in about 5 minutes, we're actually going to move down to the Trav to continue the conversation.
Okay.
Then in that situation, you could either get a unloving guardian or a loving guardian that works for the state. But the state does not love or unlove. The question of does the state love is ludicrous. The state does not love.
Okay, so when we say love, we mean, I think, love in the same way that a family can love. A group of friends has love towards someone, as in best interest, caring. That's what we mean. So instead of let's not hyper-focus on specific definitions, because many of the times, like, for example, like a state can't literally see, but we'll still use the word see or discover. And I think we should keep that in mind as we...
And you guys, you atheists, will get really upset when theists will say that God loves or God put his hand here or God wrote this or God did that.
No,
let's not do the you atheist.
No, I'm responding to you. I get to speak too. I get to put my points out. You can control who gets to talk, but you don't get to control the ideas that get to be expressed.
No, I'm not. I'm trying to
But atheists get upset when you ascribe these human actions to an unknowable deity. You guys are doing the same thing to the state. The state is the god of the atheist.
Well, no, I disagree entirely. I think that God is an entity, is an individual.
Ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. Sorry to cut you off. That's just crazy.
Well, you can say that all you want, but that's why I believe the state is the god of the atheist.
I think S is trying to talk.
Yeah, stop projecting.
Yeah, so
Devik, that was unhelpful.
That in a opposing fashion. I see God as an individual who has views of his own. So he can see, he can make a judgment. He's not outside of our viewpoint, I do not think.
Are you an atheist?
Yeah. Why?
So you are a person that doesn't believe in God, but you're telling me what God is.
Well, people have told me what they think God is, and I'm going by their definition.
Well, Villain, to be fair, I mean, you're telling us what we believe as atheists, and you've done this several times. You really like to strawman people, and I think it totally sucks. And it's pretty lame, dude. Because you're way too smart for that.
Very intelligent
You're
argument
smarter
there.
for
It
that.
sucks and it's lame. That's real
Can
cool.
I give my
I compared the theist mode of thinking to the atheist mode of thinking, and how the atheists do the same thing with the state that the theist does with the idea of God.
I never did that, did I?
Yeah, I'm an atheist, and the state has my God. Like, what are you talking about? Like, that doesn't even make sense.
Explain to me how you think the state can love them.
So the state is a collection of individuals who come together to try and make society a better place. And therefore,
individuals can love. A group of individuals cannot love. Individuals can love.
No, a group of individuals can also love.
No, the parts of the group, the individuals in the group can each independently love. There is no collective love of a group.
Why can't a collective love?
Because a collective is just an abstract idea. It's the individuals that form the collective is the real thing.
Well,
no, a collective can also be a real thing.
The individual is a collective.
Collective is just an idea to describe a group of individuals. The individuals are real.
No, a collective is also real. It's a group of individuals.
Not in the same sense. It's not an entity.
It is an entity.
You're not trying to I can use as many words as I want to, and if you're not trying to understand what I'm saying, it doesn't matter. And there is a difference between personhood. There's no personhood in the state or a corporation. A corporation cannot love. A state cannot love. The people in a corporation, the people in a state can love. A state cannot love.
Well, I think we can give.
Okay, 1 second. So we're going to leave the live chat now. It's been about almost 4 hours since we started the chat. It was very interesting, and if anyone who's watching, I doubt anybody's watching, but I gotta say it, come join us in the tavern, and we can talk about the metaphysics of language, semantics, and linguistic properties of what we mean by love and how that matters in a political and social sense. So everyone, let's move down to the tavern.
Thanks.
Let's see.